everyone, and welcome to episode 64 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame. The other familiar voice that you hear on every episode will be Matt Feuerstein. But this time, not only do we have a guest, we have a first-time guest, and a great guest, like all our guests are. But this one, not only were they the earliest, most prompt guest we've ever had, not to shit on all our other guests, who were, by early, I mean they showed up 10 minutes early, and all our other guests either showed up on time or 5 minutes late. So I don't know why I'm even stressing this right now, but they are a great guest. I can tell they're going to be great already, because they are from another great podcast, sadly no longer with us, this podcast, but the Everything Evolves podcast. If you want to listen to a podcast that reviews shows from a Gabe Sapolsky booked independent wrestling promotion, we are not your only option. In fact, even an honorable mention is not your only option, because even though Evolve was done, even though this podcast is done, I can tell you it was a great podcast. Big fans of the show, big fans of the work they did on the show. And I think you also still make an occasional appearance on kind of the spiritual successor, which is the Everything Elite podcast. Both those podcasts on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. One of the two Aarons, Aaron Taube. How are you doing? It is great to have you here.
I'm doing great, Trevor. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a longtime listener. I'm super pumped. Fired up to be here with my fellow deep vein thrombosos, my scar babies. I'm just thrilled to be here with you guys. I feel like this episode is years in the making. I feel like I perhaps one of the few guests who asked to be on the show. Several years ago.
Almost all our guests.
They're beating down the door. Yeah, right. They're begging. Yeah.
No, it's actually true. Because
not Justin Shapiro. He's like, yeah, no, we're making you be on the show, Justin. But everyone else, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, I'm fired. I'm really thanks for having me on. I'm so excited to talk about this wrestling show with y'all today.
Thanks for being here, Aaron. I just called you Adam. So should I edit that out, or should I just leave that in?
That's fine. It's cool. I'm cool with it. So,
it's similar cadence. I'm going to call Trevor Adam, just so it doesn't sound like I'm just being offensive to you personally. So both Adams that I'm talking to right now. Actually, Trevor, when you were introducing Aaron, you said, sadly no longer with us. I was like, wait, since we just started recording that happened? Like, that's... I was like,
you could probably, if you go back and listen, hear me like start to regret that choice of phrase halfway through the phrase. Like, oh, that sounds down.
But he is happily currently with us. So thank you, Aaron.
Yeah. Amazing.
And I just want to make it note, like, most of our guests have asked to be on the show, but they're all people we would have asked to be on the show, except I think we're too afraid to ask people to be on the show because it is such a time commitment. We're not between the sheets, but you have to watch a show. You have to spend like 2.5 to 3 hours with us on a Saturday night usually. And so we have been so lucky that like anytime someone that like just really talented and amazing, like we've been lucky with all our guests, is like, hey, I would like to do your show. It's like, oh, thank God. Like now if they don't like the experience, it's like it's their fault. It takes all the pressure off of us. So it is fantastic that talented people like you have asked, and thank God Matt remembered, because as you said, like you did make that request like a long time ago. You kind of you got your dibs on Manhattan Mayhem way long ago, and we finally have gotten to the show at the glacial pace we record at.
Yeah, actually, you were on a bit of a Twitter hiatus, and I was right around before we recorded Stalemate, and I was like, do you have any contact information for Aaron? Because I know we can't do the Manhattan Mayhem show without him. So luckily you re-signed up, and I was like on it. I was like, Aaron, are you still down for Manhattan Mayhem?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would have been so bummed to have missed this because I was sometimes I deactivate every now and then because sometimes there's just like a lot of bad posts on Twitter and it makes me sad or angry, and
quote unquote sometimes
yeah, from time on occasion. And so I have an alt where I follow like my 6 closest wrestling Twitter friends, and that's about it. But yeah, so I'm glad to be back back on Twitter and here with y'all tonight.
Well, you're a smarter man than me in terms of occasionally taking time off of Twitter. But as I said before, we do record these podcasts that maybe I was too hard when I said glacial pace, between usually 2 to 4 weeks, usually 2 to 3 between episodes. But if you want to get into our archives, the good news is we have been around long enough now that we have a fair bit of archives. So if you go to search on any of your favorite podcast apps for Through the Years, we have our own feed that is just our show, but we are also still on the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network. Tons of great shows there, including us. So, subscribe to one, subscribe to both. They're both great options. And with that, I think there wasn't really any news that happened between the last Ring of Honor show we covered in this one, so we can get kind of right to the show, although there is a lot of background about where it took place and the significance of it. So we'll get right to it. Manhattan Mayhem took place May 7th, 2005, at the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan, New York, in front of a reported crowd of 750 fans. So to start off with, I didn't realize this until I went back and did the research. It originally was not supposed to take place at the New Yorker Hotel because going back to PW Insider at the time, Mike Johnson wrote, Ring of Honor moved their debut in Manhattan at the New Balance George Washington Bridge Armory up from May 21st to May 7th. Part of the reason for that was that two different independent groups are running Long Island on the 21st, and the promotion felt it would be starting things off on a bad foot in a new market by running opposite them the first night in, so they made a call to the venue and rescheduled the debut. Ringside tickets for the show, which first row are priced at $45, are selling fast. And then, of course, I don't know why they changed buildings, but then that happened. They changed from the Armory to the New Yorker. Gabe actually talked about it a bit at the Pro Wrestling Torch. The Torch wrote, Ring of Honor makes its Manhattan debut on May 7th, and Ring of Honor promoter Gabe Sapolsky considers it one of Ring of Honor's most important events to date. It is among the most important shows in Ring of Honor history, Sapolsky tells the Torch. Anytime you're in Midtown Manhattan, right down the street from MSG, you have to make an impact. They say if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And that is true! Exclamation mark. For some reason, I thought that was cute. The event has been relocated from the Armory to the New Yorker Hotel on 34th and 8th Avenue, right around the corner from the Hammerstein Ballroom and just down the street from Madison Square Garden. It's considered a much better location than the original location. Sapolsky says, well, it is never good to change locations. However, this did work out well, as the new location is in about a million times better spot than the old one. So, since I am the lone Canadian here on the feed with a couple New Yorkers here, do you like my accent? Could you guys tell me? Do you guys are aware? I assume this is a better location. Are you guys even aware of where the New Balance George Washington Armory is?
I am not. Aaron, are you familiar with that place?
No, I'm gonna look at it. Let's look it up now.
Okay,
and see if it still exists.
Yeah, if it's anywhere near the George Washington Bridge, then yes. But also, I would say no matter what, yes. This is. I don't think you can get a in terms of traffic and accessibility in Manhattan. I don't think you can get a better location than the New Yorker Hotel. It literally is right next to Penn Station, right next to Madison Square Garden, and actually not even around the corner from the Hammerstein Ballroom. It's next to it. So it's attached to the TikTok diner. All of these amazing landmarks. I used to work right around there in Midtown Manhattan, and it's not my favorite part of the city, but if you're talking about easily accessible, very visible, a lot of foot traffic, very close to public transportation, it is it's about as perfect a location as you can get.
And this is also, I guess we should remind people, this was not technically Ring of Honor's first New York show. Obviously, they did the Elks Lodge for the first year anniversary show. They did that Empire State Showdown. I forget, somewhere else in New York State. I forget the city.
I think closer to, it's upstate, closer to Rochester or Buffalo area. I forgot to look up what metro area that's in. But as I mentioned before, it's like when you're talking about Empire State Showdown, that's in an entirely different world. That's so far away from New York City comparatively. The Elks Lodge show was in Queens, but being in Midtown Manhattan is that really is prime real estate for an entertainment event.
And even with both those shows, we're talking shows that took place in 2003. We're well into 2005 by this point. So it had been a long time since Ring of Honor had ever been in New York State proper. And they've only been a couple times. And like you were saying, now you were right in kind of the heart of it, right next to a bunch of well-known locations, big in wrestling, MSG, Hammerstein. So it definitely did have a big, even though it wasn't technically the first show in New York City or even New York State, it definitely did have that big kind of like special, we're kind of moving on up feel, I felt like.
Yeah, and they treated the show like a really big deal too.
And the other thing that the Observer made a note that the crowd of 750 fans in the New Yorker hotel wasn't actually, they call it an overflow crowd, and they said that was a big success. So even though you might not consider 750 fans to be like, Ring of Honor at this point had done a few crowds over 1,000, but for the confines of the New Yorker hotel that they were in, which looked like a fairly cramped confines, it seemed like they filled it pretty good. Going to the other thing we have to talk about before we get into the show is the Ring of Honor at this time for the show got their biggest piece of promotion ever up to this point. Unfortunately, I could not find it online. I don't know if it has. A little piece of it have made it to DVDs, but I'll just go into the PW Insider recap of it. PW Insider at the time wrote, Ring of Honor will have several of their stars appearing on WB Channel 11's morning newscast tomorrow morning to promote their New York debut at the New Yorker Hotel on May 7th. Ring of Honor champion Austin Aries, Prince Nana, Lacey, and several others will be appearing in the outdoor segments on 42nd Street and 2nd Avenue with Ring of Honor's ring set up. The segments are scheduled for 6:15 a.m., 7:15 a.m., and 8:15 a.m. This is really good publicity for the company. The next day, someone wrote a recap of what happened. During the newscast's opening greetings, they cut to reporter Julie Chen, who people might know. She went on to much bigger fame, hosting Big Brother and among other things, being on, I think, what's that show, The Talk or The Chew or whatever, the talk show that Sharon Osbourne just got in huge trouble on. Anyway, so the recap continues. Julie Chen was bouncing inside the ring as Ring of Honor champion Austin Aries, brandishing his title belt, entered the ring. When they went to their first commercial break, they showed Aries and Prince Nana arguing in the ring. So then at the 5:15 a.m. segment, the newscasters introduced the segment involving a new wrestling promotion, Ring of Honor. Aries was sparring with Azrael as Julie Chen introduced them by name and noted that they and 30 other wrestlers would be appearing at Ring of Honor tomorrow in New York City. Low Key, wearing street clothes, hopped in the ring and interrupted the sparring. Key got in Aries' face saying, "Hello, champ. This Saturday, you're in my backyard." He slapped Aries in the face. Aries grabbed him in a double leg takedown, and they rolled around the mat with Prince Nana and Azrael trying to pull them apart. Julie Chen sold it like it wasn't supposed to happen and was scared for a moment, then plugged she would be back with more Ring of Honor later. At 6:15 a.m., Austin Aries and Azrael were grappling in the background as Chen questioned Prince Nana about, quote, that guy who came in off the street earlier, unquote. Nana explained he was low-key and not someone you wanted to mess with, and for more on the situation earlier, be sure to attend Ring of Honor's debut at the New Yorker Hotel tomorrow, giving the cross streets of the venue. They went to a video package of Chen training in the ring from earlier today with Aries. They went to commercial plugging ringofhonorwrestling.com. Then at 7:15 a.m., when the newscasters introduced the Ring of Honor segment, they referred to the company as Ring of Horror. Oops. They showed more footage of Austin Aries and Azrael grappling, including a top rope stomp onto Aries. They went to footage shot from earlier in the day of Julie Chen wrestling with Lacey. They plugged the Ring of Honor event again, as well as the Ring of Honor website, while Chen danced around holding the Ring of Honor title belt. Finally, the 8:48 segment, I don't know if that's a typo or if it actually took place at 8:48 this time. Ring of Honor champion Austin Aries versus Azrael. Azrael chopped Aries. Aries caught Azrael in a fireman's carry into a running forward roll. Aries went to the top and hit a 450 splash, although the cameras missed the 450. Aries got the pin, with Nana counting the pinfall. They again showed the package featuring Julie Chen versus Lacey. After it aired, Chen asked Aries if she could keep the belt, and he said no, because I'm the champ. Chen tried to plug the website and got flustered, so Aries did it. They again plugged the show tomorrow. So this was considered like a fairly big deal at the time. Again, Ring of Honor would put clips of this on the DVD, try and say, hey, we were on a network morning show. Sapolsky talked to the Torch about it on the Pro Wrestling Torch newsletter. Sapolsky was thrilled with the media publicity Ring of Honor received heading into the Manhattan debut, the most mainstream media exposure the promotion has ever received. Quote, the television exposure on WB on Friday really just put everything over the top. The low-key Austin Aries thing on the show really created a buzz among our fans and set the stage beautifully for things on the card. I also had a couple of people email and said that they went to the show because of that exposure, so it definitely paid off. We will be able to use the footage on our DVDs too, so that will look great on DVD. So, do you guys remember this? I vaguely remember some of this, including just the fact that, low-key the storyline had been, he had been suspended for months, and so that, basically letting a couple days early, that's a good idea without outright saying it's good, he's going to be there. You basically knew at that point low-key's going to be there. And it was Julie Chen with Ring of Honor. I wish those clips were still easily accessible.
I guess if you have the DVD, they are. So, Aaron, were you able to check it out?
Yeah, I remember this happening. I think I taped this. Like, I have a memory of like watching this on VCR, because it was like such a big deal on the forums that Ring of Honor was going to be on. I guess it was like Pix 11 or it's like the Pix 11, and just being, one thing to think about that I think is like an interesting thing is it really feels like things are happening in this time period in Ring of Honor, like with this show being in Manhattan, being as big as it was, and you have, they're on TV, and then like after this, it's kind of like we're a couple months away from the summer of Punk, and it really feels like there's like a lot of momentum behind this company. And like one thing that I'm curious to continue listening to the show and sort of see if there are answers to is like, why didn't this promotion blow up? Like it feels like there's all this momentum, but like we know in retrospect that it's not like they start, they get up to crowds of like 2,000 at any point, right? It's sort of like the sort of popularity of the company kind of like stays the same despite kind of like this snowball of momentum. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and I wonder if also it's part of just the way Ring of Honor was constructed this time. Like when you think about this, all right, they get big, for their era, mainstream attention on getting regular segments on a WB morning show, but at the same time, like the main thrust of that, so let's say you watch that and you're curious, like I want to give this Ring of Honor a shot. I'm not sure if I'm really going to be into it, but I'll give it a shot. Your options at this point were either to buy a ticket to the New Yorker and go see the show live, which is, can be a big ask for someone if they, are kind of on the fence to begin with, or go to ringofhonor.com and buy a $15 to $20 DVD and wait for it to arrive in the mail and then watch it. And, compared to if a promotion was just on free TV, I feel like publicity, it would probably have translated to more fans if the end of those plugs could have been something like, and tune into, your local Sinclair affiliate or whatever, Saturday at 10 p.m. and watch Ring of Honor, as opposed to if you're mildly curious about this, now you have to immediately, if you got to pay to, to even try this, which for some people, that's going to be a barrier to entry right there, I think.
I also think that, first of all, I do think it did increase in popularity. Like, by 2008, 2009, they were, getting pretty decent sized crowds at that Hammerstein Ballroom, on a, several times a year basis, which I don't think they couldn't have done that in 2005. I think, they increased their attendance in Philadelphia a lot once the CZW angle started. Those WrestleMania weekends always drew really big crowds, and kind of started a tradition of indie wrestling on WrestleMania weekend. So I do think that, they at least marginally got more popular, but I think a lot of it was just the time period. I think, wrestling was not a property that TV stations wanted in that era. You had TNA. They were able to get their stuff on Spike not too long after this. You had WWE about to go back to USA, and really no one else wanted to air a wrestling company. At least that's how I remember it. I guess you had WSX shortly after this, but it just seems like the timing wasn't right for this to be like an ECW level thing. Also, they would have had to change a lot like in terms of what they presented. I think Meltzer used to make a big point about this in terms of when you have something like WWE, which has such high production values and regular fans are used to that, they're not going to settle for, ROH or even ECW level production values. It's just like you have to change things dramatically. I just think it was a different era.
Especially because with like ECW, they had lower production values, and that was viewed by many as a negative against them. But even with ECW, they kind of made it part of their image and their charm. Like, we're kind of this scuzzier, dirtier, grimier, like more legit wrestling promotion. Ring of Honor, the bad production values was not like part of the identity. It was just something you accepted to go with the great shows. You didn't accept the horrible white balancing or the the guys in cramped little backstage areas for promos or things like that. It was not part of the charm of Ring of Honor.
I do agree with you, Aaron, though, in terms of the two, the second promotion in America was TNA. And, if you wanted to present a company to a broader audience between the two of them, you'd think that ROH would do a better job of exciting and hooking people, overall, at least over the course of a few years. 2005 actually was one of the better years for TNA in terms of like how good they were, but maybe actually their best year now that I think about it. But yeah, I don't know that I agree with that. TNA had the TV deal, they had the parent company, and they had Jeff Jarrett, which is really all you need.
He's the chosen
you can't beat
one.
him. Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you for answering my inquiry and a bit of a digression, I suppose.
No, I think that's a great point too about like I was thinking watching the show, and like Matt, we've been obviously watching every show. I felt like the first quarter of 2004 in Ring of Honor, like there was some good. It was not a bad quarter, but there was definitely, as you've pointed out, a lot of like angles that went nowhere and stop starts, and it wasn't the best quarter. But I feel like going to Aaron, your point, like I feel like with this show, it definitely feels like a switch has been flipped, and it's like things are like not even heating up, like they're back to being hot. Like I'm really looking forward to the next few shows, and like you point out, the Summer of Punk is coming, and I really do feel is like really this like the last show that we covered, Stalemate, I felt like was kind of setting up a lot of the things for this show, and then with this show, it's all of a sudden just like bam, here's a big show. The next show we're gonna blow off the Danielson Homicide feud in a steel cage. In the next show after that, we're gonna blow off the Punk Ray feud in a steel cage. We're gonna be going back doing a show in Buffalo, then we're gonna do a show in New York. Then the Summer of Punk. Like it's just whatever they've been saving up starts getting every show now starts being kind of a something unique or novel to it for the most part.
And they had a Manhattan show 3 months in a row, which is pretty wild thinking back, because they don't in this era they don't usually run markets that often. But yeah, I guess they went back to the New Yorker hotel in July. They went to a place in the theater district in June to coincide with ECW One Night Stand. So that's an interesting choice too. And they lucked out in that their Manhattan debut was such, really went off so well.
And I guess this show was so big. All the stars was there. As Gabe tells us on commentary during the show, but I'll just read it off from the Pro Wrestling Torch. Rap star Redman was there. So was Jay-Z, except an honorable mention, guys talked about this. Like during the show, Gabe is talking about, Redman and Jay-Z and all these big stars are there. Well, apparently there was like a show happening, some kind of other event at another part of the New Yorker hotel that those people were at. They were not there specifically to see Manhattan Mayhem, Ring of Honor's event. But the one person that was there actually was Paul London, was apparently backstage at this show. So Paul London returning back.
But wait, you skipped over the Jay-Z thing too fast, because I heard Gabe say that. I know him saying Redman was there. I was like, okay, maybe Redman was there.
Yeah, right. I was like, oh, maybe Redman was there.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I guess Redman was there, right? Because that's like, it feels so esoteric that you wouldn't make it up.
Right. But when he said when he said Jay-Z is in the building, I
would have known, right?
I was immediately like, okay, he must like, it must be like a loophole. Like he was in the building because it's a whole hotel, but like he was not at the, like, yeah, the New York hotel is like a big attached like complex. There was no way that Jay-Z was going to be at an ROH show in 2005 and it wouldn't be treated like a huge deal.
That you wouldn't even see him,
right?
For a second. They wouldn't get a shot with him, a quick endorsement from him. If he was that big a fan to show up,
exactly.
Nothing.
It reminded me though of us in SummerSlam '98 when they showed Method Man in the crowd, and I was like, well, that's what they would have done if Jay-Z was there. Jay-Z was really famous in 2005, even then. Yeah.
So we open the show finally. We can get to the DVD proper. We open outside with a shot of the New Yorker Hotel, the site of today's show. We then see Colt Cabana standing outside in the busy streets. And as I mentioned earlier, this is all shot with no white balance. Everything is dark and incredibly blue. We were just talking production values. This is one of the great examples of Ring of Honor frequently not white balancing the camera. So
I was trying to figure out if this was dusk, if it was a white balance thing, if it was both. Like, did they just film it at the absolute worst time? Because it definitely, it looks like it's dusk. Like it might have been in the middle of the day, in which case that would be really upsetting. But yeah, it definitely had a dusky look to it.
Colt says, and I quote, this is a line that only a guy like Colt Cabana could get away with. "Look at me. Look how hip. Look how cool I am." Someone waves behind Colt as he launches into a street-side Good Times, Great Memories. He dedicates it to Nigel Mcginnis. Colt asks random people on the street what they think of British people. He asks a guy who has the most amazing hair I've ever seen what he thinks about Nigel Mcginnis. It's clear this guy is not part of the he's not a plant, he's just a stranger. And the guy says something like, I think that sounds like a British name. Then Colt badgers another guy who calls him fucking annoying. So just Colt being wacky and annoying and getting a real, what I would describe as a real taste of New York.
Yeah, I would say like Colt, he was incredibly enthusiastic. This was energetic and entertaining, but I have to say he did seem very annoying. And I would have thought he would have like better follow-ups and comebacks than this. Like a guy just says, like, what do you think of Nigel Mcginnis? He goes, I think he has a British-sounding name. And then Colt just says, a British-sounding name. See, they love you, Nigel. And, I would be like, sir, congratulations. He is in fact British, so good job. He probably came up with that name because it sounds British, as a matter of fact. So Aaron, were you outside watching Colt Cabana film The Good Times, Great Memories?
Yes.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
You remember
yes.
it?
Yeah, dude. So,
how blue was it outside?
It was not that blue, but it was just incredible because it was like this was my first live wrestling show that I've ever been to.
Oh, very first ever. Not even just first ROH, but first wrestling.
No,
of
my
any
first
kind.
pro wrestling show.
How old were you?
I was 16 years old.
Okay.
Wow.
And, my dad drove me and Alec Hubel and Pete Labazetta into the city. And like we get to the building and Colt Cabana is like shooting a promo right outside. And on the DVD, you can hear at the end of the promo, someone's like, I love Colt Cabana. And that's my friend Pete. And like afterwards, he came and ran and gave my friend Alec a hug. So it was just like, wow, the stars are out in New York City. Because like as a 16-year-old kid, like Colt Cabana was like such an appealing character, right? Like, and I still enjoy his act like as an adult, but like I think his act is like sort of specifically tailored to like a 16-year-old boy, and he was like the coolest, funniest guy you could imagine.
Yeah.
So was this? Did you go to all of the New Yorker hotel shows? All three of them that they had?
I think so. Yes. If there were only three, then I went to all three because I went to this one, Escape from New York, and Joe versus Kobashi. So I was at all three of those shows.
Nice. I was at two of the three of them because this was the show that got me into ROH, but not until after because I was still upstate. This was either the weekend of or the weekend before my college graduation. So I knew ROH had a big show in New York City, but I didn't actually see it until it came out on DVD. After I actually went to the next Manhattan show, The Future Is Now. Did you go to that one?
No, I didn't go to that one. I'm watching. That's where I am because I started watching the shows when you guys started doing the podcast, And then over time, I was watching them along with you, and then I got a little bit ahead. So I'm midway through The Future Is Now in my Ring of Honor watching.
Nice. Yeah, so that was my first ROH show. And then right after that, like, I got this DVD because I really liked it, but I was like, okay, let me see more. And Gabe was like really pushing Manhattan Mayhem. And I watched it and I was like, holy shit, I can never miss another one of these ever again.
Yes.
Like I had such like regret of not being at this show. And it's like, yeah, it's so cool that you got to go. Yeah, so you got a ride. And I actually have to say, even though this was, a really very accessible public transportation area, and I went to a lot of these shows by subway. So I was still living in Staten Island in 2005 once I got back from college with my parents. So I had a job at the mall for a little while until I got things going. And so I'd work on like a Saturday, and I would get off of work at like 6, and I would just like run to my car and drive all the way to Midtown Manhattan. But it really only took maybe a half an hour. And I always, whenever I did that, I would always find parking. Like for whatever reason, like that time was, and like right outside, it was the only time I ever had to like pay for parking was Joe versus Kobashi. And I think I had to work like till maybe like 6:45 or something, and I just didn't even have time to look for parking, and I ran in. But yeah, this is a very convenient location, not just for trains, but even for cars when you considering it's Manhattan. But anyway, yeah, I digress.
You guys talking about, Matt, every time you talk about like, the trouble or the ease, like living in Western Canada, the idea that like it's a half an hour to see Manhattan Mayhem or shows like this, like, oh really? Because here, like if I wanted to see something, like there was times I thought like when I was younger, like, I could see Bryan Danielson if I wanted to drive 6.5 hours each way. And it was like, can't talk my parents into that. So thank God damn it.
Well, don't don't feel too bad. If I had taken like public transportation from the Staten Island Mall to Manhattan Mayhem, it would probably have taken me like an hour and 20 minutes. So,
But next we go to a different kind of horror. We are in the ring. It is showed. No, wait. Sorry, I skipped ahead a whole segment. No, we cut to Samoa Joe. He's in the ring, but it's the empty New Yorker. The ring is already set up in the New Yorker hotel, but it's before the show, so the building's empty. Joe is waiting for Jay Lethal to show up. Jay quickly does show up. Joe, and he thanks Joe for turning his life around with that pep talk Joe gave him all those months ago about needing to get serious, drop the Hydro name, blah, blah, blah. Jay says Joe made him into who he is today. Joe then at this point gets angry at the thank you and shoves him. He's angry that just at the fact that Jay is thanking him. He's saying, hey, has anything I taught you gotten through to you? If you're thanking me on a night that I'm looking to take your title from you, and Joe then says, if you've learned anything from me, you'll do whatever it takes to keep this your title. Jay then pie faces Joe, shoves him into the corner, holds him there by the face, says Joe underestimates him. Jay says he's going to show Joe just what he taught him, and after tonight, he's going to tell Joe where to meet him from now on instead of vice versa. I really like the idea of this promo, as we've seen a lot with early Jay Lethal. His acting chops were still not particularly good. They would come a long way to the point they are now. So he didn't quite sell it great. It's hard to really sell that you're intimidating Joe, but I did like the idea that Joe keeps pushing this guy, and there'll be a moment like that early on in their match tonight too. And then Jay's like, well, fuck you, I'll stand up to you now. And I like the idea, the execution. Maybe it's hard to stand up to Samoa Joe, I imagine, to do that in a really compelling, believable way, because he has such a strong presence and character.
Yeah, I agree with you exactly. This was a really good segment, mostly in theory, and the delivery of Jay Lethal was, it had a ways to go, but but Joe was really good, and it told the story that they needed to tell. I think that was I would still give the segment a thumbs up overall.
Absolutely. Then next we cut to the ring, and it's showtime. Everyone's in the building. Bobby and Cruz introduces the first match. It's a three-way tag team match where the losing team must disband. The Ring Crew Express enter first, and they're immediately attacked by the Carnage Crew, who are returning for the first time after months of their stipulated suspension. For those who don't remember or haven't been keeping up with the podcast, they took the direct fall in that big scramble cage match that a bunch of teams in it a few shows ago. With the steps of that match was whoever directly took the fall in that match, that team would be out for, I forget if it was 60 or 90 days, but a certain period of time. So this is their first appearance back since then. They Carnage Plex done, and they immediately afterwards, immediately after the Carnage Plex done, Loke tries to pull down his hoodie because it's come up and shown off his gut, and then right after that, in like the same 10 seconds, he stumbles backwards and trips over Dunn and falls on his ass, and the crowd laughs at him. And I felt really bad for him because just that whole 10-second sequence where it's like your big return angle after a couple of months out, and just all of that happens is just, I can imagine they had a good recovery though, because DeVito and Loke at this point then do their combo crucifix bomb neckbreaker spot on Marcos, and they do it so he lands on top of Dunn. They get a couple of hubcaps are thrown in the ring. They do the hubcap concerto on Marcos. They follow that up with a spike pile driver on Dunn, doing it off the apron through a ringside table. If you watch this, Dunn does a incredible open mouth, like, oh my God face upside down while he's in the pile driver before it hits. And the crowd chants "holy shit" as the refs run to ringside to check on Dunn and Marcos. Loke gets on the mic and he cuts a promo that I half understand through the sound system. He calls he and DeVito fat and drunk and pissed off. Loke says Ring of Honor and the wrestling industry can kiss their ass. I thought the funny part about that was as Loke is saying Ring of Honor can kiss his ass, you can clearly see DeVito was wearing a Ring of Honor brand t-shirt. So, I guess the t-shirt doesn't necessarily tell you where your loyalties lie, but Bobby Cruz then says, as a result of the attack, the Ring Crew Express is now out of the match, and it's a 2-on-2 tag where the losing team must disband. So, ironically, the Carnage Crew, they hate Dunn and Marcos now, but they kind of just saved them from possibly having to disband as a tag team, and we are left with a losing team must disband tag team match. Lacey's Angels of Deranged and Izzy, with Cheech in their corner, defeated Azrael and Dixie in 10 minutes, 14 seconds, when Deranged pinned Azrael after he hit his weird Canadian Destroyer Rana piledriver thing, which he used on the last show. Matt, very similar match as we saw these teams have last show, except there was actually 1/4 difference because that match had Cheech in the place of Izzy. This time we get Izzy in the place of Cheech, but what do you think about this match?
Well, I want to talk about the Carnage Crew segment first, because I thought it was pretty noteworthy in that, and I actually wanted to ask Aaron about this. So this to me was the segment where you were like, oh wow, this is going to be like a big deal show, because, the Carnage Crew coming back, I feel like in most places on most shows would not feel this electric.
Right.
Didn't it feel like just a huge ass deal? Like, oh my God, the Carnage Crew are back. They do this like big, they're attacking the Ring Crew Express. They put them through a table, and it just feels like this gigantic angle, like that everyone's been waiting for. And as somebody who was watching this, who was not following the month, the show to show flow of ROH, I just assumed it was really big when I watched it. And then you see them on other shows, and it's like, oh, actually, it's like a lower mid card thing, and they're out of shape, and one of them fell over the other guy. But it just felt like a huge ass deal. And like, Aaron, was this the first thing that happened on the live card?
Yeah,
too?
As far as I can remember. And this is it's a great angle. And I think that like in the building, it was kind of one of those vibes, because you're packed in, and the vibe was like, yeah, it was electric, and it was sort of one of those wrestling shows. This was my first ever wrestling show, but now I know that there are shows where you get into the crowd and you can just tell that the people are there and they're excited and they're there to make it a good show. I think sort of like the Joey Janela, the first like one or two Joey Janela spring breaks crowds were like that. Or if you go to a PWG Bola, the crowd is like that, where you're like, wow, like everyone's just pumped to be here. And it's like Midtown Manhattan, and it's just a great angle because like, the Ring Crew Express music plays, so everyone's pumped up. They've got their like classic rock, whatever, their 80s rock thing going, and then bam, like the Carnage Crew just comes out and cuts them off and kicks their asses, and cuts what I think is a pretty good promo. I think that like I actually have enjoyed the Carnage Crew more on rewatch than I did at the time. I think like particularly Loke is a good promo. The stuff about like, no one's missing us on the message boards is like a real thing. And the crowd just, yeah, right. Like the crowd elevated this angle and, it was hot.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
Oh, sorry, Matt. I was just going to say, and the other thing is, it's kind of a throwback to Gabe would often do these kinds of openings when they were first in a new market, where it's kind of reminiscent of even the opening of the very first Ring of Honor show ever, where you have a tag team come out and then kind of another tag team just destroys them, and of course big progress because this time it wasn't a woman involved, but like I did kind of get a little bit in a good way, like. The Hit Squad coming in and laying out a team vibes from this segment. Just, you're not expecting it, and all of a sudden there's this big, giant beatdown to start off a show.
Yeah, and I think this was better than that. For one, it was not offensive in the same way. But also, it I don't know, the crowd reacted better. The spots were better. The Ring Crew Express are great bump takers. And, it felt like an ECW show and an ECW crowd in arena crowd in the best way, it's one of the hottest starts to a show that that I can think of, honestly, and it involved the Carnage Crew beating up the Ring Crew Express, so that's surprising to me anyway. But as far as the Izzy and Deranged versus Azrael and Dixie match, this is different than the first two matches that we watched between them, because they actually just kind of did the match that you always would have expected them to do, which is not quite a scramble because they did, do tags and things like that, but it was moves. It was a moves match. They just did a bunch of moves, and that's pretty much what I wrote down. It's moves, but the crowd was reacting big to all of it. Like the crowd was just so on fire, and I think that they did a really good job, but I also think that, again, in front of a different crowd, this probably would not have come off as well. I think it came off really, really good. Just a really good indie spot fest of a match. And I just think that the crowd probably put it over the top. For one thing, Izzy and Deranged, they have, they're wearing their ties. Meanwhile, Dixie and Azrael have matching gear. So that just means they definitely won't break up tonight. Wink. But, besides talking about how Jay-Z was in the building, they also say that Lacey wasn't there because she has a very important business meeting with P. Diddy. And Maxim magazine was there, which really was a very 2005 reference to me. It was just a lot of fun moves. Dixie and Azrael doing a slam leg drop combo on Izzy, where Azrael does the leg drop off the top rope. At one point, Azrael rips off Izzy's shirt so he could chop him, but the crowd does not react like it's Jeff Hardy taking off his shirt. It's not. Izzy does not get the same reaction. Izzy and Deranged do a double team brainbuster on Azrael, but Gabe calls it a split leg from Izzy, which I was like, what? That's like a brainbuster. I don't know. I didn't understand that call. Let me see. What are some of the other big moves? They do the Doomsday Ace Crusher, but for some reason, Deranged tries to pin Azrael with only 1 foot, so they didn't really treat that like the near fall that it could have been. Azrael went for a top rope Rana on Deranged, but Deranged low blowed him, knocked him down, and crotched him, and then Azrael hit a superplex, which to me was the most basic the basic move of the entire match was a superplex. But whenever guys are down, the crowd is clapping big time. They do a hot tag segment, and Dixie hits a really low snap German suplex on Deranged. Then Dixie holds Deranged in a camel clutch, so Azrael can double stomp him. But Izzy pushes Dixie out of position, and Azrael stomps the back of Dixie's head. So Azrael double stomps Izzy, and now it's down to Azrael and Deranged. And Azrael just goes nuts with him with kicks and a low drop kick. And Deranged comes out of nowhere with the that reverse Rana into a pile driver thing. That's what Prazak called it, like he did at Stalemate, and gets the win out of nowhere. But yeah, it was just, like I said, it was a moves match. But the crowd was so hot for it that it felt like a really good match to me.
Aaron, so what did you think? I guess then, knowing that this was your first live wrestling show, I guess that would mean this was the first live wrestling match you've ever seen. Does it hold a weird, special place in your heart just because for the rest of your life, the first live wrestling match you ever saw was Deranged and Izzy versus Azrael and Dixie?
You know, I sort of, this isn't one of the matches from the show that stands out as much in my brain, even though it was the first. But this was a really, this was a fun match, right? They did their moves. It was, I think that, and in the crowd, the crowd is sick. Everyone's having a great time. I think the Azrael, shine section where he does the really, stiff kicks and stuff is sort of they're getting ready to try to make him a thing in a way that, obviously sort of in hindsight didn't quite work out. But in that moment, it looked and felt good, and you got kind of this sort of no nonsense, kicky guy, low key vibe from sort of 2002 low key vibe from him in that section of the match. And it was good. I mean, the one thing that I thought watching it back was kind of it's sort of in between a moves scramble and a regular match, and sort of one thing that stuck out to me was that it's clear that the Lacey's Angels team is the heel team, but it's not really worked. There's not a heat section where the heels beat up the baby faces. It's kind of just there are times where it feels like the baby faces are kind of beating down on the heels and what you would think of as a heat section. But overall, a fun and good match with, a lot of cool moves, which is all you can ask for.
I didn't like this match quite as much as either of you, but I guess this will tip my hand about what I felt about the show. I would say this was my least favorite match on the show, and I would still say this was an above average, very enjoyable tag match. And I would say this is as bad as it gets on this show, in my opinion. But Matt, the one thing I would disagree with what you said is you said you felt like this was kind of different than their previous matches. I thought this match was shockingly similar to the Cheech and Deranged versus Azrael and Dixie match we just saw at Stalemate. I felt like it did have big spots, but I felt like a lot of the big spots were also in that match, right down to the Doomsday Ace Crusher, the double stomp camel clutch spot, although like you mentioned this time it goes wrong. But it even has the exact same finish, which is Deranged pinning Azrael clean with the weird Canadian Destroyer Rana piledriver thing. And it has the same basic structure where Azrael is the face in peril. He eventually makes a hot tag to Dixie. Deranged wins clean over Azrael. I found it was very rarely in Ring of Honor do you see a match this similar to another recent match, because it's a product where the idea is that some people are going to be watching every single show. And I thought it was, and that kind of threw me off a little bit, even though this probably is the best version of that kind of match these guys had. But overall, I did enjoy it. I think the booking, I guess this is, it's not the absolute end for Azrael and Dixie, obviously, although they're not none of these guys are too long for the world in Ring of Honor. But I did think I guess my question for both of you, because I know, Aaron, you were watching these shows too. What do you think of how Dixie and Azrael were booked in this run? Because obviously, you can't push everybody. It's not like there wasn't a ton of other talent that was deserving of spots as well. But when you look at the Special K breakup angle, I think Dixie and Azrael maybe got one win, which was to win the rights to the Special K name, which they immediately said they didn't want, and the other team that lost it said, oh, we have a better name anyway. Then the feud inexplicably continued on, and they lost the final two matches with Azrael, the guy that, clearly if you were watching the shows around this time, it was clear from the commentary and the booking that Gabe, of all of these four guys, Azrael was the guy Gabe kind of had eyes for maybe trying to push in the future, and he will give us a somewhat of an attempt to it in the coming months. But yeah, he's the guy. This feud ends with him as a face losing clean to a heel in two straight tag matches that end the feud, basically. And even right down to they never used had their own ring music for most of this feud, and the heels did. It just it really felt like this feud did not do those guys any favors. I felt like.
Yeah, I agree, right? And that was what I was thinking too, watching this back, was just sort of like, I was so surprised, and I just watched the show a couple of months ago, but I was surprised again that Azrael I knew they lost the match, but I was surprised that he took the fall, because, right, like, you know, and I think even into like the winter of 2006, they're like giving him singles matches against, you know, I think like Austin Aries and Nigel McGinnis, like they tried to do something with him, and you're right, like they just look like nerds who lose matches throughout this feud, when it was clear that like they didn't really take the guys in the Lacey's Angels stable seriously. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the plan was.
It feels like they wanted to do more with Deranged, at least, also, and I don't know why that abruptly stopped. I don't know if that was personal stuff or professional stuff, but my assumption was just like they wanted to do more with Lacey's Angels. I mean, it was a new gimmick featuring, one of the big new like promoted characters, Lacey. They did use her a lot over the next few years, so they obviously had bigger ideas for her. And so I'd be interested to hear, how much they were really thinking about where they were going in the future with Lacey's Angels at this point. You're right. It is kind of weird looking back that Azrael took the fall over Dixie, but it's not weird to me that they lost, because, like I said, I just kind of thought that they did want to do more with Izzy and Deranged, or especially Deranged. But overall, yeah, I mean, they did a terrible job with the good guy version of Special K. I mean, like you said, the no music thing, them just looking sad all the time. It was really, really bad booking. That's why I was impressed with the match, because it was so over. Yeah, a lot of the moves were the same as in that stalemate match, but to me, the vibe of the match was totally different. The pacing of the match felt very different. It just felt it felt pretty electric. And that match just felt like a lower mid-card match. So that's a major difference to me between the stalemate match and the Manhattan Mayhem match.
I guess the last thing I want to point out is just Lacey is not on this show, which is kind of weird, knowing that she was on the WB segments on the day before, on Friday.
P. Diddy called the meeting at the last minute.
So I don't know if she just had an obligation the next day or what, but it is weird that she was in New York, obviously, to do the WB segments, and then she's not on the show. But just a little detail. But that brings us to the second match on the show. Nigel McGinnis defeated Colt Cabana via pinfall in 11 minutes, 51 seconds with a victory roll. Aaron, we were still in the early stages of this feud when it was just getting going, but I was shocked by Nigel McGinnis at this point always seemed to be a bit more over than his push, but especially in New York, they hadn't been in New York State proper at this point for since he had been in Ring of Honor as a regular, really. And the crowd's really into Nigel, I would say, as much, if not more, than Colt Cabana, which was kind of shocking to me. What do you think about the match and just, I guess Nigel's reaction?
Yeah, well, I think that Nigel's reaction is coming off of the first match that they had during the I guess the third anniversary night 2, the match that they had in Dayton in February, right?
Yeah.
Was really well regarded for sort of all the trickery and chain wrestling and stuff. And so it felt like everyone was kind of oh yeah, this is the rematch from that that Dayton show is thought of as being sort of a sneaky classic show, right? Where it's everything's good throughout the show, and sort of well regarded. And so I think people were high on him coming off of that. I didn't love this match. I felt like it was kind of derivative of the first match, and I felt you said this match was only 11 minutes, but it felt longer. It just felt I know that they were telling their story of Nigel getting frustrated, and then it ends in kind of this sort of accidental, but is it accidental? Needed the groin, and they're doing their part in sort of advancing the story and sort of Nigel's slow burn. And I just but it just felt like it was just a little too much of the cutesy stuff for me. I think a little too much of a guy getting on the other guy's back, and Colt Cabana crawling away, and it was just it felt like that sort of stuff. There were just like a couple too many of those spots for me, and I was just sort of like, okay, well, like let's get to the point here. So that was my review of the match.
I liked it more than you, but I can completely see why someone would have that opinion. I do agree that this match was another match that was, a lot very similar to their previous Ring of Honor match that happened not many shows earlier. But maybe just because their style was so unique for Ring of Honor at this time, I was more than happy to get like another dose of that. And I don't think it was necessarily a copy move for move, although it was much like that first match. For those who haven't seen them, it's basically almost no like impactful moves. It's just chain wrestling encounters and pin attempts and a bunch of comedy mixed in, but it's not a comedy match, but there is a lot of comedy, I think, weaved into it. And I still really enjoy. I didn't feel like it was long like you did, but I will say in the final couple of minutes, I finally started to feel like, okay, they're starting to kind of go to the well a little too often. Like it's starting to feel like they're repeating themselves a little bit. It only for me got that way in the last 2 or 3 minutes of this match, but it did at that point. But I still really had a very good time watching this. I liked all sorts of neat little stuff like, Colt continually like repositioning Nigel's body when he's near the ropes for pins, but Nigel keeps putting a different limb on the ropes every time, or Colt's rolling out of a move, so the next time Nigel just steps on both of Colt's legs so he can't roll away. But I guess it's not a fatal flaw, but what the one big flaw in this match obviously is, Matt, much like the show we just covered before this, Stalemate, where in the main event, Bryan Danielson and Homicide, they have to repeat a spot that's obviously botched because it's a key spot in the story of the match. The end spot, basically the spot that leads directly to the ending of this match is Nigel is supposed to do like a forward kind of roll trip or something, and he's supposed to quote unquote accidentally, as he's doing the forward roll, knee Colt Cabana in the nuts, and that allows him to get the roll up win. Except the first time he does the roll, he doesn't come close to hitting it. The camera tries to kind of hide that it's a botch, and to the point where at first I didn't realize it was a botch, but then you can clearly see the two of them talking to each other, and then they set up and do the exact spot a second time, which kind of hurts because the whole story of the spot is supposed to be, did Nigel mean to do this or not? But the fact that they had to redo the spot kind of stretches the believability on that story, like the mystery of it when he's like doing the exact same weird convoluted spot again, and this time, oh, he does hit him in the balls. But still, I like the idea of the spot and the story that they're kind of do is he a heel or was it a legit mistake at this point kind of turn. But overall, I like this match a fair bit. Matt, where'd you fall in kind of the spectrum on this match?
I think I'm definitely closer to you, Trevor, in that, I definitely see what Aaron's saying, but also the thing that really makes me appreciate the match is that no one else on the roster is going to do a match like this at this time, and really you don't see too many people doing matches like this at any time on any show in America. And I really appreciated that aspect of it. ROH always liked to try to bill itself as like kind of, it has all sorts of styles. It's not like WWE where everyone has to work the same style. Sometimes it doesn't always live up to that. Sometimes the matches are a bit samey, and no one else is doing this match. They could do this match 10 times and they'll still be the only match on the show doing it. Not that they should do it 10 times. It obviously was a lot like the first match, but I think a little bit more comedy, like leading through it. I think they kind of advanced the concept a little bit more. Like you said, the different things where Nigel's trying to stop Colt from escaping a move, and they do these like escalating crawl outs, where like Nigel has Colt in some sort of position, and Cabana somehow finds a way to crawl out on his hands and knees in a kind of a funny way. So Nigel stands on his legs, like you said, and then Nigel does the artful dodger and feels like he's getting the best of Colt, but Colt just crawls out again, and then just like Colt tries to crawl out another time, but Nigel just kind of like stays on his back, so Colt is crawling with Nigel on top of him. So it's just like, it's a unique but sort of fun psychology. You're right, the botch finish was so glaring that it's like I don't know if they could have edited it or done something. But the other thing that was kind of silly was Gabe being Gabe in terms of like telegraphing the finish, in terms of like, Nigel teases kicking him low, and Gabe's like, I would be shocked if Nigel went for the low blow there. Nigel Mcginnis is a sportsman. He's not going to use cheap tactics like that. Just kind of hammering you over the head with the storyline. But I definitely enjoyed it. I think they have good chemistry. I also like the slow burn heel turn that they're doing with Nigel.
So yeah, after the match, Nigel offers a handshake. Colt is really peeved about the nut shot, but they eventually shake, and Nigel even helps Colt get out of the ring and walk to the back, even as they kind of bicker with each other over, was that nut shot intentional or not. But again, continuing that little bit of a slow burn.
One thing I noticed about the show, all of the undercard matches, they cut away like immediately, like at the end of that first match, at the end of the next match, but for this match, they kind of give them a little bit more time to show the walkout.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting, the editing choices, because we've seen on these shows, they have to do a pretty wide variance on, like, some shows, if they have a lot of time, you'll see, like, every second of the post-match and entrance, even, like, when just guys kind of standing around and, like, high-fiving fans. And then there'll be shows like this where it is more interesting, like you said, like, what matches they actually give you a few extra seconds to sell things, because this show seemed a bit more packed. So time, in fact, that we'll get to later, there was a short match actually cut out of the show just to make everything fit. So next, we go to Alex Shelley in some dark, dingy part of backstage. Shelley says this is what it's come to. He's not even allowed in the Ring of Honor locker room anymore. Shelley says he helped build this company, and he doesn't even get a spot in the locker room. 2 years earlier, he made his debut in Ring of Honor in the Murphy Rec Center with a guy who's going to be on the ECW pay-per-view next month. He actually mentions that. And with the current Ring of Honor Tag Team Champions. Shelley says he didn't win. He didn't even make an impact. But he learned that Ring of Honor was a promotion he wanted to call home. He wanted to make Ring of Honor his home promotion. Shelley says for the next 8 months, he tried to earn a spot in Ring of Honor, but he learned it was a foregone conclusion, because in late January of 2004, he broke his collarbone, and a shot at a spot flew out the window as he sat at home and healed for the next 3 months. He says, though, but during that time, I kept my eyes open. I kept watching things like the Super 8, and I found 3 guys with untapped potential: Roderick Strong, Jack Evans, and Austin Aries. He says, I told myself I would save them from the mid-card purgatory I was in, and 1 year ago we formed Generation Next together with the goal of getting to the top as a unit. Shelley says the ambition they had blinded them and made them do things he's not proud of. And he even puts over Austin Aries at this point. He puts him over for being Samoa Joe and defending the Ring of Honor world title all over the world. But then he reminds us that Aries booted him out of a group that he created. He says, tonight I'm going to show Aries that he was wrong. I thought this was a good promo. Again, the last few months of Shelley, like the time between Final Battle, when he's kicked out of Generation Next, and now feels like kind of a lost quarter of the year for Shelley. And this feels like almost kind of a combination recap of why this is a feud and why this is a major match, and also almost like kind of almost an apology, like it's a refocusing of Alex Shelley. Basically, this promo made me wish that the feud for the last 3 months had been stronger, because this should have been like the go home promo of like 3 months of really good promos. Instead, it's kind of like the one good promo I think we get out of this feud. I think
I sort of felt like a similar thing, which is just like this promo is too late.
Yeah.
Like it just like, this is not a promo that you cut like immediately before the match. You're using this to like build up the match, but the match is already there. Like, it almost feels like they're trying to make good for the weird booking of Shelley over the past few months. And I think if this was Alex Shelley's promo out of the gate, or even just a little bit after that, right after the breakup of Generation Next, I think, you would have gotten to a point where this match felt like a really, really big deal. And, I don't know. I mean, the crowd was into that match, but I don't know if it really felt like the big deal, at least on video, that it should have felt like. Aaron, do you remember considering Shelley versus Aries like a huge deal, like the title match of title matches when you went?
I personally did. because I loved all of this. And I've been listening to you guys on the podcast and shaking my head in disagreement over the past.
All right, let's hear it. Let's hear it. This is what you're here for.
I think that this promo is one of the most memorable promos in the history of the company up to this point. I don't think it's as good as the Wrestle Rave promo, for instance, Punk's promo, but I feel like it's like super memorable. I love the pathos of it. I love kind of like Shelley kind of like almost being proud of Austin Aries because it proves that like his project, his brainchild was successful, but the sort of the bitterness of it being this other guy who swooped in and took it. And I liked that story. I mean, I loved Alex Shelley. Like I was just a big fan of him. I thought he was like the coolest guy. And I really, you don't see this in wrestling a lot. The idea, like there are not a lot of wrestling stories that explore the idea of forgiveness in the sense of like, bad guys turn face, but then we just like forget about what happened, right? There's not often like a sort of like they're not like asked to be accountable for their actions. They're just good guys now.
Yeah, the only one I could think of is when Sergeant Slaughter looked into the camera and very earnestly declared that he wanted his country back, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan forgave him.
Right, so it's like, so I thought that it was interesting, and I believed Alex Shelley, and I forgave him, and I wanted to see him make good. But you're right that they didn't quite stick the landing with how they did it in terms of the sort of, I think last episode, the sort of like the lack of continuity between CM Punk forgiving him, but then saying, he's not allowed in the locker room. No one forgives him. They didn't quite pull it off. And perhaps that's because it's, pro wrestling is not a medium that has sort of a restorative justice process. The justice process is violence, right? That's how justice is handled. That's the justice system in pro wrestling. So I thought the story is like a valiant and interesting attempt to introduce or sort of explore a concept that is sort of difficult to work inside of pro wrestling, given that everything ends in a fight. And I just love this promo, and I loved Alex Shelley, and I thought that I went to that show like thinking he could win, really wanting him to win. And we'll talk more about the match later. I don't think the match quite delivers, but like when he hit the shell shock in the match, I was like, oh my God, like this is it. So I bought into it.
It does seem like the crowds, all the way through the summer before he turns heel, wants to forgive Alex Shelley. Like they want him to be a good guy, and ROH never quite gives it to them. Like the crowd wanted to forgive him more than the booking did, which I think is interesting.
Yeah,
and I think, like Aaron, I completely agree. This is a really good promo, and I agree. Like, I think the idea behind the Alex Shelley like post getting kicked out of Generation Next, the idea, I agree, is a fantastic idea because, like going to what both of you guys said, like Matt with the Sergeant Slaughter thing, it's very rare in wrestling that a guy, a heel guy turns face and like the faces just don't all immediately forgive him, or at least everyone doesn't just act like, oh, he's great. We have no reason to doubt that he's, not being genuine. And I think the idea of a heel, getting kicked out, apologizing to everyone, actually saying like, I realize now I fucked up. I did wrong things. I shouldn't have done some of the cheating and stuff. And then people not knowing for sure, if he's genuine or not. That's really interesting. I think the problem is, there's one of two ways you can do that angle, and they're both great. Like, you could have it so he really isn't genuine and he fools everybody, or he really isn't genuine and, he eventually reveals himself. He stabs someone in the back again right when they trust him. Or you could go the other way where he legit, like, is really repentant, and eventually he maybe over the course of months earns the babyface's trust and becomes a real babyface. And I feel like Ring of Honor, for the first, the months we've been covering, me and Matt, like, I don't think it's clear if Ring of Honor even knew which direction they wanted to go on, because sometimes the commentary is acting like is he? Maybe he is trying to be good. Again, we get like the CM Punk accepting his apology, but then other times they act like, oh, I don't think this is genuine. Like, I don't even get what Ring of Honor wanted me to believe at this point. And I mean, I have no idea what their intentions were, but the impression I get watching is they were just kind of making up as they went along, because I don't know if even rewatching this stuff, like, and knowing where it eventually ends up, I don't know in these months that we've been watching if the intent was always for Shelley to eventually just go heel again, or for if there was originally supposed to be a time where maybe they were going to make him be like the redeemed babyface. And I think if you went all the way in either direction right from the start, it would have been like a great angle that is remembered more than it is right now.
Yeah, and by the way, I thought of one other example of a babyface trying to a former heel trying to earn their babyface turn. When Nikita Koloff was on Sting's team at the War Games in '92, and people were like, "Can you trust him?" And then he pushes Sting out of the way and takes the Dangerous Alliance's like attack, and then he and Sting hug, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Nikita Koloff, he really is a good guy." So. Yeah,
and Alex Shelley could have had that moment. You could have easily had a great moment where he like sacrifices himself and proves to everybody that like I'm willing to do the right thing now. Like, you can see it, but we never really get a moment like that, especially not up to this point. Where again this feud could have used, I think, up to this point something like that, where it's like Shelley gets complete redemption and now he's going to kick Aries' ass and take the title. But either way, good promo. Third match on the show, James Gibson defeated Black Tiger, a.k.a. Rocky Romero, via submission in 15 minutes, 57 seconds when he made him tap to the guillotine choke. I thought this match was good, like their previous match that they had when Tiger was just wrestling as Rocky Romero. I felt like it had a bunch of time and didn't really tell much of a story. It was just good, solid wrestling. As always, I'm a broken record. James Gibson does so many of the little things right. I think the little thing I noticed this time was he does a thing sometimes where like he's really good. Like sometimes wrestlers, they'll throw a move with like an injured body part and then they'll sell after they hit the move. But sometimes Gibson will do that even with a body part that isn't injured. Like there's a point in this match where he throws a forearm to a Black Tiger, and then he shakes out his own arm like, ow, I threw this forearm so hard, I hurt it. And the story of the match isn't that his arm is hurt, but I like that he was even willing to do that just on a random move, just to show like, yeah, my forearm's effing hurt. Like I could even hurt my own arm, like, because I'm throwing my arm really hard in your skull. And just little detail work like that is what Gibson is so great at. I thought this was a good match. I thought the main problem I didn't like was I felt like when Black Tiger had a sustained run of offense in the middle of the match, it started to get a little bit dull. I feel like he wasn't quite making me into the little things as much as Gibson did. You could even hear the crowd quiet down a bit and then pick up when Gibson starts getting offense again. Although I did think Rocky Romero had some really good athletic moments in this match. Like he does a vertical leap from the ring to the top rope to do a Rana, and just really impressive stuff like that. I feel like unlike the first Gibson Romero match this year in Ring of Honor, Romero didn't have any big botches. So in that sense, his performance was improved. Again, good match, not great match to me, but I also like the booking of it in a weird way, just because this felt like Gabe trying to erase the Best of the American Super Junior as much as he could, because obviously you couldn't and wouldn't want to have Kendo Kashin come back as Dragon Soldier B, but you could have Gibson beat the guy who went to the finals and kind of say, hey, And Gabe even sells this match on commentary as Gibson trying to like make good on what he views as a disappointing Best of American Super Junior tournament performance. So overall, I like the match, but it's not in my top 2 or 3 matches from the show. Matt, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was better than the Back to Basics match for sure. Part of it was what you said, but part of it was also I thought the finishing sequence was more exciting. There wasn't a ton of, like you said, psychology and stuff until the last few minutes with all the ankle lock stuff and Gibson selling the ankle. I think the match was carried on the strength of the execution, which I thought was just really, really good from Gibson, but also from Black Tiger. I thought that they just like everything that they did was really good, and the crowd is so into James Gibson. This crowd was into, almost everything, but they just consistently, these crowds love James Gibson, and a crowd that's really into a match. If you've listened to the show, you could tell like that definitely has an influence on how I perceive the match, for sure. It can't take a terrible match into like good territory, but if a match is good, it can make it seem better. And I thought this was a pretty good match that was made to seem better by the fact that the crowd got really into it at the end and just really was willing Gibson on. By the way, he did not have, for the first time in ROH, he did not have Confederate flags on his trunks tonight. He debuted those green John Deere trunks, which is definitely an improvement. But it was just like a really good, it was a good, no, I wouldn't say really good, but a good traditional competitive athletic wrestling match. And, that's fine. I did notice one thing, though. This was another in a series of matches on this show, and there are a few matches like this on the show where the finish feels kind of abrupt to me. Like that first match where they had the move out of nowhere, that Rana pile driver thing. The Mcginnis match where he got a quick roll up after a low blow. Then a couple other matches later, but then this one, Black Tiger hit the Northern Light suplex and Gibson kicked out and just immediately turned it into the front choke and the tap out immediately. And it was just like, oh, it's over? Okay. I don't know. It feels like almost like a stylistic thing that a lot of people in ROH are doing at this point. I don't know if this was like an edict that came from Gabe or something, or if it's just a coincidence, but it feels like there's a lot of matches that end in a way that feels kind of sudden.
Aaron, you got to see Black Tiger and Rocky Romero on the same show. I mean, how incredible is that? What'd you think about this?
I also noticed the abrupt finish, but what I wrote in my notes was kind of an abrupt finish, but really dang good. And I just thought that this was just like a good, solid pro wrestling match. And I think that definitely what Matt said about the execution rings true for me. Just watching these guys, these guys are just fucking great. These guys are just really good, smooth, intense pro wrestlers who know what you're watching two real elite professionals, I think, just have a good mid-card match. And I thought that Gibson has really stood out to me on the rewatch, and I never really connected with him as a kid. And I think because it's I was a Jewish guy from Long Island, and he was just sort of this very exaggerated country boy gimmick that really didn't resonate with me in a way where, I wanted to be cool like Alex Shelley, but not like James Gibson. But I thought that just his facial expressions and the way that he just sort of was desperate to avoid the Tiger suplex or desperate to sort of get to the ropes when he was in the ankle lock. I thought his facial expressions were great, and sort of the sense of urgency he had was great. And I really enjoyed this. So I would say really good, but not great. But both guys, you watch it and you're like, these guys are just two excellent pro wrestlers.
And I agree with both you guys that the finish was abrupt. I've been noticing that with a few of the Gibson matches, that there's been one flaw with Gibson's Ring of Honor run so far is it seems like he's had a few matches where he kind of just gets the choke out of nowhere and wins. And maybe that's the idea. He wants to sell that you can go get it from out of nowhere and just be a sudden end. But yeah, there has been a few Gibson matches, I think, where we've said, Matt, that that was kind of a quick abrupt end all of a sudden where he just grabs the choke and it's over. But brings us to it.
Well, I was going to say, because unlike Aaron, I was a self-loathing wrestling fan, so I didn't want to be like any of the wrestlers back then. but now I do, but only Outback Jack. It's still my life goal to just be like an exaggerated Crocodile Dundee-esque Australian stereotype. That's my life goal.
I just want the clothing style of Gary Michael Capetta. I want some of those sweaters. I want to age gracefully into that. That's my wrestling future goal. But
I believe
hashtag wrestling goals.
Yeah.
Hashtag me too.
I mean, crikey. No, I don't know. Did Outback Jack have a catchphrase?
Matt, I'm the wrong person to ask. If only Justin Shapiro was on the show, he would definitely know if Outback Jack had a catchphrase. Or would he? Huh. Anyway.
Joe Gagney would definitely know.
Yes, Joe Gagney. God, you made me think of him, but yes. Moving on to something more pleasant to think about. A Ring of Honor Tag Team title match, BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs successfully defended their titles when they defeated Jack Evans and Roderick Strong in 14:45 after Whitmer pinned Evans after he and Jacobs hit the Doomsday Contra Code. So Jacobs doing the Contra Code off of BJ's shoulders. Matt, this was a match with two teams that in some ways are kind of similar. You got the dynamic, both teams have the little guy that takes a good beating and the big guy that chucks people around and do the combination offense where the big guy tosses the little guy onto people. So kind of a little bit of a mirror match. And another big tag title shot for Strong and Evans. What'd you think?
I've always loved this match. Like, it's just always been one of my favorite ROH tag team matches. I would say watching it back now, it doesn't quite reach the levels of my memory in that it's like there's sloppiness to it that maybe I didn't totally remember, but it's so much fun. You know, the crowd is like, and again, and this is consistent for the whole show, just electric for it. Like it just feels like such a fun, exciting experience. I would have loved to have actually been live for this. I could even see, I'd have to ask Aaron, but live, it almost feels like this might have been the best match, just in terms of like as a spectacle. But yeah, it immediately made it seem like Whitmer and Jacobs were a better tag team than Whitmer and Moff. This was only their first tag title defense, and they didn't have a lot, period, ever. And they were up against probably the most exciting tag team on the Indies in 2005 with Evans and Strong. So I think that probably made a big difference in how it came off. But man, it was just like so many fun moves and stuff. And, they did character work at the beginning with Evans breakdancing and then Whitmer pretending like he was going to dance, but instead he just like snaps a few times and slaps Evans really hard across the face, which the crowd loved. And, I definitely think Whitmer and Strong were on point in terms of like the sound of their strikes. That slap was really loud. Strong's chops were really loud. They were able to get that going well. And Whitmer and Jacobs, they were pretty well oiled in terms of doing double team moves. A lot of, like you said, like kind of a mirror match. Whitmer was power bombing Jacobs onto Evans and lifting him up and dropping him onto Strong. For a second match together, it's, they definitely had some of their spots down. And of course, Strong and Evans also had a lot of those. Like, for instance, there was a spot where Jacobs was draped across the middle rope with like stomach down, and he put Evans on his shoulders and kind of backflipped him off into a double stomp onto Jacobs' back. And one of the biggest pops of the whole night for that move. And Gabe doesn't even call the move. He just yells dangerous. Like, that's the entire call for that move. I guess, what can you call it? I guess like assisted backflip double stomp that will break someone's back. That's kind of what it is. For a lot of the match, Evans is wearing what might actually be his least like professional looking ring gear ever, because he's just wearing this giant red t-shirt and white pants and a white bandana. But right as I was typing that note, he took off his shirt and it was wearing a sleeveless undershirt, which is, still not wrestling gear, but at least more of a typical thing that you might expect Jack Evans to wear. But he just looks so funny doing all these moves in just this like giant red t-shirt. Like, it was a t-shirt that you would expect a much bigger wrestler to wear, I guess is what I would say. But Generation F, they get enough 2 counts that every time Jacobs kicks out, they emphasize his toughness, and he husses up on Strong. But then Strong hits the sick kick, so that comeback doesn't go anywhere. But the kick does get a holy shit chant. And pretty much all the moves get some sort of insane reaction because the crowd is just eating it up. There's a little bit of awkwardness as Strong tries to take Jacobs off his feet, but Strong puts him on his shoulders, and Evans comes off the top with a Doomsday like crossbody. But Jacobs hits a reverse Rana on Strong, so Evans misses the crossbody. Then he hot tags Whitmer. Goes crazy, rolls through an Evans crossbody, hits a brain buster, goes for a kick on Strong. Strong catches it and hits a backbreaker. Then he puts Whitmer across his knee, and Evans comes off the top with a moonsault, but he mostly lands with his foot on Whitmer. But I actually think that made the move look cooler, like just like a backflip like kick to Whitmer, who was on Strong's knee. I don't think that was what was intended, but I guess, who knows, maybe. The Whitmer and Jacobs do the Doomsday Rana, but Jack kicks out. And, I still feel like that doesn't seem like a move people should be kicking out of. But I have to say that the move that they win with is just as cool, so, maybe it's fine. But, they do a few more big spots. Ode to the Bulldogs with a Phoenix Splash. Crowd goes nuts for that. The Whitmer kicks out after a delayed cover. I don't think they've actually ever pinned anyone at this point with the Ode to the Bulldogs, which is kind of funny because that's still their signature move. Evans goes for a top rope Rana, and it's kind of botchy. It's like both men are standing on the top rope, and Evans jumps up, and he has a long way to jump to hook Whitmer's head. And he kind of glancingly gets his legs across the head, falls off, and Whitmer kind of takes the bump after. It was okay. It wasn't like a glaring bad spot, but definitely not what they were hoping for. But Strong hits the double knees to Whitmer, but Whitmer hits a big clothesline right after. Strong goes to the floor, and then they do it's almost like a power bomb into a contra code off the top rope on Evans, and that's the finishing move. So that's a good one. So I guess it's okay if they didn't win off the Doomsday Rana. I still think the Doomsday Rana is probably a slightly better, more impressive looking move, but that is Jacob's finisher, so I can't complain. But yeah, no, this was just the double team moves were insane. The crowd was going nuts. It was a really cool coming out party for Jacobs and Whitmer. It made it seem like they would be really great tag team champions. I feel like if you were going in excited for this match in particular, you got your money's worth.
Aaron, like Matt said, this seems like a match that would have been just a blast to watch live in the building. What was this like in the building?
Dude, this match slaps so fucking hard. This isn't one of the best pro wrestling matches of all time, but it's one of my favorites. I think about it a lot. It's the match that stands out the most in my mind from being there. It's just, even now, it holds up. It's just fucking bonkers. All the combinations of guys are good together. And, you don't really see a lot of Evans in the ring with Jacobs, but every other combination is just great. I think that, BJ Whitmer is one of the most underrated guys from this era. And I think that if he were around 10 years later, it was just what's the difference between BJ Whitmer and, Biff Busick, other than, BJ Whitmer was on a roster with Samoa Joe and Low-Ki and CM Punk and all these guys. I thought that they're both, Whitmer and Strong are so explosive and powerful in this match. The double teams are just great, just totally insane. And being there live was just nuts. I was so mad when they kicked out of the Ode to the Bulldog. I wanted Strong and Evans to win this match and win the titles really badly. But just, an absolute thrill ride in person. It holds up. It doesn't totally hold up in the sense that, what Matt says is right. I think in the 15 years since, we've seen guys like Ricochet and Will Ospreay who can, do as many flips as Jack Evans, but do them with a sort of grace and body control that he was not able to do, or at least at this point in his career. But just an absolute barn burner of the match. Insanely hot crowd. Never a dull moment. This is, I don't know. Yeah. Just a formative moment. I feel in terms of this is fucking sick. I want to feel this as many times as I can. This is, I don't know. It's such a, thinking about that moment and being in the New Yorker hotel and just this just insane match with the high, this is what it is to go to pro wrestling, right? This is why we do this shit.
this was my favorite match of the show up to this point. At the very least, this was very good. I agree with both of what you guys said. I agree that like there are some sloppiness parts, and I think we've talked about before. The thing that ages the worst in wrestling, and it kind of ages the quickest, is any kind of big spot-based match, because it just feels like wrestlers are always getting faster and more mechanically polished. So that, like Matt, you did a great job pointing out like some of the things that didn't look quite clean, and that does take down the match a tiny bit. But I think it's also a testament to how good this match is, that like it being a match that's just a complete crazy spot match in some ways, it like still is as good as it is, even though that's the kind of match that I feel like has advanced the most. It still holds up pretty darn well considering all of that. And yeah, it's just like I said at the start, it's really fun just because these two teams are kind of like, in some ways, they're not completely similar, but they are kind of similar composition teams. And like you were saying, Aaron, basically every combination is fun in this match, because it's fun to see Strong beat up Jacobs. It's fun to see BJ beat up Jack, and it's fun when the two ass kickers meet, and it's fun even when you get to see the two smaller guys come in. But my complaint, Matt, would be like you, which is the ode to the Bulldogs. Generation Next has had, Strong and Evans have had problems with like, that's like clearly the coolest move they have, and it's never like hardly ever the finish for them. And I feel like already BJ and Jacobs have the same problem, because the Doomsday Rana is such a cool spot. They've done it in their first two matches, two of their tag matches now at least, and both times, like in this match, Jack Evans kicks out of it, and it's not even Roderick Strong breaks up the pin. Like Jack just completely kicks out of it clean. And, I'm not one of these real sticklers. I'm not like the most old school guy in terms of protecting things, but I do feel like a spot that cool, they've already had guys kick out of it like two times, and they're like 2 or 3 matches into their Ring of Honor tag career. And I do feel like that, even though, yes, the finish they did do, the power bomb contra code, is almost as cool. I really feel like, just like the ode to the Bulldogs, they already have a move that is so cool, it just begs to be their finisher, and they're just kind of using it in the middle of matches as like as just a random near fall, but still really exciting, just match with lots of big spots. And
I always thought that Evans and Strong should have been the perennial tag champs instead of Aries and Strong, but they weren't. And so, to me, this match is their peak as a tag team. Like I said, this is still, despite the flaws, still one of my all-time favorite tag team matches. And I do wonder what could have been if they had just were given like a solid run where they had just tons and tons of matches together. Like how, even just a rematch of this one could have been amazing.
And it's
sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, it's sad because, 2005 is kind of a lost year sounds a little too harsh, but, it's a year where the Ring of Honor tag titles, they're kind of just stuck in the undercard, and they kind of, don't really seem to know what they do with them, and they don't really get a real kind of renewed push and stability until Aries and Strong win it. And I do always wonder, like watching this match, I was just thinking, kind of like you were thinking about, like what would have happened if for like 6 months out of this year they had just given Strong and Evans the titles, because I think clearly like they were super over. I mean, this is probably, I would be shocked if this doesn't end up being the best tag match BJ and Jacobs have together. And the last tag champs, the Havana Pitbulls, the best tag match they had in their Ring of Honor run was shockingly against Strong and Evans. So it's like, it would have been great. Like, what would have happened if you had put them as the focal point, if they had the titles? And like, yeah, it's just one of those things we'll never know, I guess.
Yeah, I was watching, they did that like DVD. They did this series for a while, like in Evolve, where Gabe would do like a shoot interview with like the Evolve wrestlers, like right before they went to NXT. And they did one with Roderick Strong, and there was like a moment in that interview where Roderick Strong was like, yeah, I still wish we would have gotten, we could have been champions. Him and Evans. So I think it's funny that like it's, he too appears to be, wistful and wishing that this team got that title run.
And a couple other quick points. I also believe this show was the debut of the shiny new Ring of Honor tag belts, as we talked about recently when Dan Moff got, quote, injured in a car accident. I don't know if he ever returned the title, his tag belt, or if it was just late. I believe the other tag belt was kind of beat up. So here the announcing makes a point to tell us, look at those, they got brand new, shiny Ring of Honor new tag team title belts. And also, I guess we should just mention the finish of that match, the big contra code, assisted contra code. Jack Evans takes a really nasty bump on his head and neck that maybe wasn't supposed to take it that way. And we'll get to a review at the end of the show of this match where people are acting like that's almost like he meant to do that. I really doubt that Jack Evans meant to land on his head and neck that way he did, but it is, if you go back and watch this now, take note, like, it's a really brutal bump he takes, and it's one of the many bumps that Jack Evans took in his career that people said, oh, he won't even make it until he's 30, and yet he's still wrestling today.
Incredible that he's still wrestling, still seems like healthy and can do flips and stuff. Like, it's remarkable, actually.
Yeah, I mean, he is one of the, like, definitely there are times where people say, oh, this wrestler will never make it if they don't change their style, and they're absolutely right, but he's like one of those weird exceptions that proves the rule where, like, he's probably outlasted a lot of wrestlers that people would say had wrestled way safer and more old school than him. And yeah, he's still going, and many of them probably are more beat up, at least on the surface, on appearances than he is. So
yeah,
that brings us to the Ring of Honor Pure title match. Samoa Joe defeats Jay Lethal via pinfall in 16 minutes, 33 seconds after he hits the Chimera combo, which is a German suplex, a dragon suplex, and then an arms capture, kind of straight jacket German suplex. Samoa Joe becomes the new Pure Wrestling champion. Aaron, one of my favorite points on this show is it's just how the crowd reacts to Joe, both his entrance and then right when he wins after he wins the title for the first time in months, they're able to play, instead of, his Mama Says Knock You Out theme, they play again, the champ is here, and the crowd chanting along. Like, Joe, this is one of those nights where Joe really does feel, even in a quote unquote indie promotion with not the highest production values, he really does feel like one of the biggest stars in the world.
Just an absolute super duper star. Yeah. I mean, watching it back, you're like, wow, he's just so fucking good. Everything he does is like crisp and exciting and explosive and serious. And yeah, this was really great. This is a great match. And Joe, and I think it's like the booking, I feel like it's sort of like kind of a bummer for Jay Lethal, in the sense of, like, it felt like it took forever for him to win the Pure title, where he had that feud where it was like he's feuding with Jimmy Rave, but the belt is on Walters and he has to beat Walters eventually. And it's just like, it felt like it took forever, and then he finally got it. And then, like, losing it to his mentor just kind of made him look like a nerd and a dork. And it never really I don't think that he never really gets to that level again in this incarnation, like this Ring of Honor run. But yeah, this was really, really strong, very just intense from the very beginning. And yes, the reaction to Joe, he's just, I mean, it's like, how many years, and I haven't watched enough pro wrestling to say, but like, how many years in pro wrestling are better than Samoa Joe's 2005, right? Just like an all-time great at the peak of his powers. It's fun to watch.
Yeah, I thought this was a very good match. I thought this was, right up there so far with the previous match. Maybe a little bit lesser, but like really good match. A completely different kind of match, obviously. At the same time, this is one of those matches that kind of was a tease to me, because I felt like this is one of those matches where they show you a couple directions they could have made the match go in, and then they just kind of go, well, we're not going down that road. And both of them looked really interesting. Like, the first road I think they could have gone down on is very early on. The opening of the match, Joe just comes at Lethal full bore, forces him back into the corner. He's peppering with strikes, and then Lethal just fires back, slaps him right in the face, and knocks Joe off his feet. Joe rarely does that big of a sell where he's acting like woozy and falls to the mat, and Lethal just gets mad and screams like, the real champ is here. And it's kind of like the promo that we talked about at the start of the show from him, where it's a really cool role reversal, and it's a really interesting idea. I don't think I don't buy that Lethal his slap is enough to knock Joe off his feet like that. Again, I don't think he at this point had the authority to really sell it. But I think the idea of the match being that Lethal's really pissed off and kind of taking it to his mentor, who's also kind of bullied him for all these months, I think that would have been a really cool vibe. And the rest of the match is kind of doesn't go with it. That's the most emotion you see. It's right at the start. And then likewise, I think this match does a really interesting idea with the rope breaks, where Joe, in probably pretty early in the match, probably by the time the match is halfway over, Joe has just used up all of his rope breaks. He has no hesitance, unlike some wrestlers in these matches, about grabbing the ropes. He uses close fists twice, and that costs him his third rope break because you're not allowed to do that. You get a warning after the first one. And commentary does a really good job, Gabe, I think, where he points out that Joe is not the veteran when it comes to the pure rules. While he's the veteran, he's the far more accomplished wrestler, Lethal has way more experience with the pure rules than Joe. And then once Joe uses the 3 rope breaks, it hardly comes into play in the rest of the match. There's one big spot where Lethal gets Joe in a choke on the apron, and Joe just dives off the apron through the announcing table to break it. But for the most part, once Joe uses up all the rope breaks, this match kind of we're not really going to think about submissions that much, and it's just more of a standard, indie work rate match, a good version of it. But, and again, the match they gave me, really good. But I just felt like both of those things could have been even cooler ideas, and they kind of tease you we could do this, and then it's we're just doing that for a spot, and then we're going away. But overall, I really enjoyed this match quite a bit, and my favorite part, Matt, before I throw it into you, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but for anyone that's watching this, if you already watched it, go back and watch this. In the moment after Joe wins the match, the camera angle, you can see him, lying on the mat right after, there are 2 girls in the front row, which is already rare for a Ring of Honor show at this point. And when Joe wins, they freak out so much. They jump up and down. They flail their hands around. They high five. You have never seen 2 people, let alone, the rarity of 2 women, this happy that anyone has won anything in a wrestling match in a long time. It was just so heartwarming and cool. They are just so pumped that Joe has won the pure title. Worth going back for people that haven't seen it. I might have to clip that maybe for Twitter after this. But Matt, what did you think of this match?
We mentioned Joe's 2005 and how great it was. I feel like this match is kind of Joe getting his mojo back in a way. He does have an amazing 2005. But he didn't really have one so far in ROH. Not that anything was bad or anything like that, but it's not like you can point to a ton of memorable Samoa Joe matches from the first, 3 months, 4 months of the year. This is really the first one that I think back to oh yeah, Samoa Joe 2005. This is the earliest match in the year that I have specifically fond memories of. And I think after this match it's kind of all uphill for him. Which makes sense because we had read that he was pretty depressed, right? With wrestling, and I think he's probably kind of snapping. I'm just assuming kind of snapping out of it at this point. He's really good here, like you said, a huge superstar, the Hulk Hogan of ROH, or maybe even more like the Stone Cold or the Rock of ROH. And they have a damn good match. It's funny because I read Meltzer's review of this show, and he mentions their match was good, but Lethal needs to work on his strikes. And then I was watching, and Lethal had these really hard chops that are super loud, and I'm I don't think Lethal's strikes are so bad. Did you notice specifically that Jay Lethal had bad strikes?
I mean, no. Again, the only spot that looked a little bit weird was at that spot I said at the start where Jay fires up and he slaps Joe in the face, and Joe does a big wobble like "you knocked me out" still. But it's not even like the slap was bad. It was just like Joe sold really big for a slap to the face, like that was like almost a knockout punch. But like, yeah, other than that, I would have never guessed that. Like, I wouldn't go, "Oh, Jay Lethal has really weak strikes." I thought they were fine.
Yeah, I think sometimes they're even really good. Especially his chops are much louder than I would expect, from a guy his size. Like he definitely is like a heavy hands type of guy. But yeah, I also didn't even mind that they just kind of went for like an action style indie match. I actually think that was a successful choice because most of the pure title matches, they try to get kind of cute with the pure title rules, and this one they're just like, whatever, we're gonna have a match and it's gonna be for the pure title, but we're gonna kick each other's ass, and I think that worked. I think the crowd was like super up for it. I think it was really exciting. I really liked the way they did the table spot, where it was like a desperation move by Joe, where he just kind of like, it's like a suicide dive through the table that sent both of them through it. I thought that was really cool. I always love table spots that don't seem set up at all. Because so many of them do seem set up. Whenever you can get a table break without it, telegraphing it, I think that's pretty cool. This was another match though, where the finish did feel kind of sudden to me. Like not like it's like just super like boom, it's done, but just like, like Lethal hit the dragon suplex. But then Joe just ducked a clothesline, and he hit the Chimera combo, which he really doesn't win matches with that often. So like that's I think why it felt abrupt to me. Like I just like he had won matches with that before, like, but it probably not since 2003. And that's fine, but just like I'm not saying it really made the match worse, but it did stand out to me, especially considering I noticed some other abrupt finishes. But no, I really, really like this match. I think it was a damn good match.
A couple other little notes from my couple other notes from my notes. Gabe at one point says, one day 20 to 30 years from now when there's a Ring of Honor Hall of Fame. And it was funny because I thought like, oh, you're getting a little ahead of yourself, Gabe. But ironically, like we're not that far from 20 years from that match now.
No, we're 16 years on, and it's been now 19 years since the start of ROH. I think they could definitely start talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was a lot of people watching that show at the time thinking, oh, yeah, right, Gabe. Yeah, it's going to be around 20 years. And, it's taken a lot of weird turns to get there, but they probably will be around 20 years, maybe. Who knows how much longer. But
yeah, an honorable mention does do a Hall of Fame.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
We voted in the most recent one, in fact.
That's right.
I will never tell who I voted for. Never. But
you don't remember.
Probably not. I don't remember much, man. Other moments I liked, I really loved, there's a moment where Bobby Cruz is making an announcement that like Jay Lethal has a warning because he used a closed fist, and Joe hits the elbow suicida like mid Bobby Cruz announcement. So Bobby Cruz is just like he's like doing the announcement. He's like Jay Lethal has, and then it's just a pause, elbow suicida, and then he continues his announcement. It was such a weird, neat little thing. And then also, I just love the way Joe takes suplexes. Like, he takes Lethal's Dragon Suplex. Most people, when they take Lethal's Dragon Suplex, they do like a full flip and land on their stomach, which is probably the safest way to take it, which is smart. Joe, like, a lot of times when he does take a big suplex, he'll go up almost like, it looks like he's almost going up heavy, and he'll land like right on his neck and shoulders. And it makes it look like the most scary thing in the world. It's probably not, again, the healthiest way to take a suplex, especially if you're a big guy, but it always looked great when he took suplexes like that. But after the match, for the first time in months, the champ is here plays. The crowd chants along loudly with it. And Joe's just one of those guys where he just feels like a 10 times bigger star when he's a champ than when he's not. Even as the pure champ, just him holding that belt, he's made for holding a title belt. Joe and Jay at this point shake hands and hug, and I do love that they never did a heel turn here. Like, it would have been such an easy pro wrestling thing to have, like, Jay turn on Joe or Joe cheat as a swerve to win the belt. I love that,
It literally happens a few months later.
Yeah, that's what bugs me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I love at this point that they did it like this.
It was better. It was better. It was better like this. I will say that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I like going to what Aaron said before. You know, like Aaron, I get what you're saying about how like it's kind of bad that Jay Lethal was just getting his push, and I mean he will still be pushed, but he loses his first title quickly. But that also it is kind of like what these big ROH title reigns, why they were important, is sometimes like a guy like Joe would just squash people's dreams. Like, there were matches during Joe's world title reign, like against Christopher Daniels and Homicide, where you could tell like, oh, the crowd's ready. If there's a title change tonight, the crowd will go ape shit and just love it. And they would just have Joe squash their dreams. And just the same here, where like, yeah, the story, in a way, the heartwarming story is the rookie finally gets out from under the shadow of the mentor, but it's like, no, Joe he's still better, and he just fucking beats him clean, and these little bummers add up to kind of a cool, I think, kind of add up to some of the coolness of Joe.
Yeah, but sometimes you can go too far, like with Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn, things like that, where it's just like, where you guy just like never gets over the hump, but that is a Paul Heyman thing, like, where it's just like, this one guy's just better. They're just better.
And we will see in Ring of Honor, there are definitely times where, yeah, they do wait too long to pull the trigger on certain things. But I did like this moment. But then just this Jay and Joe hug, the lights dim, we hear dogs bark, and then Low Key's theme hits. He has returned to Ring of Honor. Julius Smokes, Rocky Romero, and Homicide by his side.
And the unnamed...
I was about to say...
Yes, well, go ahead. Fine.
I was just about to say, if you're talking about key jaws at Joe from ringside, which allows Monster Mac to get in the ring and attack Joe from behind.
But I need to rant about this. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Because
no, go ahead.
This is what I mentioned this back when the Hit Squad broke up, which is Monster Mac comes back to ROH a few times as part of the Rottweilers, and they never say who he is. They call him one of Homicide's like goons or whatever they call him. And it makes me so mad. I don't know why they do that. It feels so disrespectful. This guy was like one of the major tag teams of the company, and he, still was wrestling in other places. Why can they not acknowledge who he is? It drives me insane. Like, I still am driven insane by this fact, and I need to know why.
Yeah, I don't get it, because like we've seen sometimes, like with just the last show, they have guys that Ring of Honor isn't going to use, where I think was it EC Negro, he interfered in the main event of the last show, and they just, it's one of the Rottweilers, like you were saying, goons. But yeah, Monster Mac, anyone that's a longtime Ring of Honor fan will recognize him. Like, even I get sometimes, maybe I was trying to think why they wouldn't mention him. I could think, well, if Gabe knows he's not planning on booking him, he doesn't want to make you think maybe that he's going to book him by acknowledging him. But look, because everyone knows who he is, and he was, a fairly significant person in Ring of Honor in the first year, the Hit Squad was a big tag team. Like, it's crazy to not acknowledge who he is, and you're acknowledging that he's there because you're saying, oh, he just attacked somebody, but you're not saying his name. Like, like you said, it's really a weird middle ground. It
just feels very disrespectful to me. And obviously, maybe he did. I mean, maybe he did mind. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like he minded. And maybe they discussed it and like he understood why. I don't know, but it feels disrespectful to me.
Like, again, if they didn't like him that much to begin with, I don't think he would have been having run-in spots on a major show. Like, clearly someone didn't mind enough to be like, okay, Monster Mac can run in and attack, Joe. But yet they wouldn't say his name. It is bizarre. But anyway, at this point, after Monster Mac attacks, the crowd chants NYC as Smokes nut shots Lethal and Joe with his baseball bat. Key gets on the mic as a beaten Joe and Lethal are held down. Key says the last time he saw Lethal was when he put his size 11 Timberland all up in his grill. Key, in fact, reveals that he was the mystery man that attacked Jay Lethal backstage a few shows ago. Key says New York is Rottweiler territory. He says where he comes from, it's all about respect, and respect is either earned or beaten into you. He slaps Lethal, lays into him as Smokes does the same to Samoa Joe. Key then says anyone who disrespects the Rottweilers will go down like a punk. So this was another one of those moments, Aaron, where low-key, another one of his returns where it feels really cool and really major. And, of course, you have this really cool vibe where even though the Rottweilers are supposed to be heel, obviously it they were faces basically for the new hometown crowd. It did feel like sort of like, Ring of Honor was trespassing on the Rottweilers' territory, and it gives this whole night kind of a cool vibe, even though, again, it does kind of go against the storyline where these guys are supposed to be villainous assholes, and the entire crowd just fucking loves the Rottweilers tonight. But, yeah. I mean, what did you think about this whole thing?
Just a sick angle, sick vibe. The music cue was like with the dogs barking and the DMX people like, this is not a fucking game. Yeah, I mean, you gotta love it. Place went crazy. I remember being a kid and being like, well, just because they're in New York City doesn't mean we should cheer these. They're still they're still the Rottweilers. They're still
you were a good 16-year-old fan.
Not that I wasn't like a smark or whatever, but I just didn't have like New York City pride. Like I don't know, and so I was like, wow, I guess we're all just like, I guess that's what we're doing. We're cheering the Rottweilers tonight.
Yeah, you're not from Long Island, so we can't.
Yeah, they're not from. You're not from Suffolk County, New York. Get the fuck out of here, right?
Look, I take hometown very literally.
Yeah, we only stand, Trent Beretta, right? Long Island wrestling, but yeah,
Zack Ryder.
Zack Ryder as well. I don't know where on Long Island he's from, but I think Trent is from like Mount Sinai or something like that.
I mean, there is one extremely famous Suffolk County wrestler.
Sure. Oh yeah, Mick Foley, the God, yeah, Ring of Honor legend as well.
That's right.
And speaking of Mick Foley, this is sort of another thing where it's like another sort of like, this show is like fan service and it's a lot of fun, but it's also sort of like another low key return that kind of like peters out in a few months. If I recall correctly.
Yeah, at least he gets to the Kenta match, which is, I guess, the main thing. Yeah.
But it's like he came back for the Kenta match, right? Like this thing with Lethal does it ever get like fully actualized or like this sort of resumption of the Joe versus the Rottweilers feud?
They do have some blow off matches with Lethal and Key in Long Island, as a matter of fact, but they never get to the Key versus Joe singles match, which is really what everyone was ultimately hoping for.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing, looking at the schedule, I actually looked after this to see how much he worked. And it's like we do get the Aries non-title match. We get the Kenta match. We get a few like matches against Joe and Lethal or Lethal in the singles. But it's not that Low-Key isn't around and doing significant matches. It's almost like this, you almost feel like after this angle, like, oh shit, Low-Key's going to be on almost every show. And he really is just here and there for the rest of his run, which is like another almost year. And then, of course, the way he leaves in the early next year where apparently, I mean, we'll get to it when that happens, but apparently the story was Gabe wanted him to put over Roderick Strong, and then he tried to hold Gabe up for more money. I mean, that's the Ring of Honor side of it. So, yeah, kind of this is the last of the many ill-fated runs of Low-Key, but there will be some good stuff on it.
But this angle and like the follow-up later is really what takes this show from like, a lot of good wrestling to like a big deal show also. Like
like anything can happen at Ring of Honor.
Right. Again,
in New York City.
It really feels like ECW in the best way. Like just in terms of like big angles, violence, hot matches, just like there's a continuity and like pacing to this show that I don't think too many other ROH shows have, and I think a lot of it is tied into this whole situation with Joe and Lethal and the Rottweilers.
And it's funny because it's kind of a repeat in the tone of it in a lot of ways of like the angle they did at Ring of Honor Reborn Completion the year before, which is Low-Key returns after an absence. He's a big asshole. He lays out Joe and his friends, and you're like, there's just something about where it works just as much this time, even though it's the same thing a year later, and we still haven't got the Joe match. It's still just as cool and just as exciting, even though it's just, in some ways, it's basically the same angle, but it's still just so fucking cool. Yeah. But, it's intermission at this point. We go backstage where Gary Michael Capetta is joined by Nigel Mcginnis. Gary says Nigel's win tonight may have been tainted by a low blow. Nigel is incredulous about it. He's like, I had no idea I'd even given a low blow. It wasn't intentional. I didn't do it. He's like, I feel great about winning tonight. If Colt wants a rematch or wants to find me, I'm not hard to find. So again, Nigel's pretty good at this point about playing it straight with maybe just the slightest hint that, he's really taking pleasure that he won, but he's not twirling a mustache at this point, being like, "No, I didn't mean it." Like he's playing it fairly straight. So I like his acting on this. We then get an ad for the Ring of Honor Wrestling School featuring a lot of clips of head trainer CM Punk as his theme music plays, which was kind of funny in hindsight, knowing that like this guy they're kind of selling the school around would be gone within months. Next, we get clips of Spanky wrestling Roderick Strong at FIP's Violence is the Answer show. Gabe does a voiceover saying FIP is Ring of Honor's sister promotion, and Spanky wanted clips of this match shown for some reason while he's in Japan, as he wants to send word that that he can't wait to get back to Ring of Honor. His Japan commitment is forcing him to miss this show, and he says his one goal is going to be to win a Ring of Honor title belt when he comes back. So just a little bit of clips, plugs for a couple things. And then we get a match that did not make the show. I only learned this from the live reports. Aaron, one of my favorite things to do on this show, because it never has a really good payoff, is to ask people that were at these shows live to try and remember matches that got edited off the DVD from shows they watched a decade and a half ago. They never remember any details. Aaron, do you remember Fast Eddie defeating Davey Andrews in a short squash match?
No.
Because that's apparently what happened here.
I was going to say, was there a Ricky Reyes squash match on this show? But that may have been the next...
Yeah. And then tell us about some other unmemorable things that happened when you were 16.
Yeah. Well, hey,
what did you have for homework that night?
No, I have no recollection of this match.
So that brings us to a match that is a lot more memorable. A dog collar match. Jimmy Rave defeated CM Punk via pinfall in 13 minutes, 38 seconds after he hit a series of chair shots, including 3 of them right to the head. Before the match starts, we get a clip of the cheese grater attack during Rave's entrance. Nana is wearing a tuxedo tonight, looking very sharp. He makes Jade Chung be a footstool for Jimmy Rave as usual. He gets his usual shut the fuck up chant from the crowd when he gets on the mic. The crowd then chants Eddie Murphy at him, which is a little problematic maybe.
Not great, not ideal.
Yeah,
and then there's more racism coming. So
yeah. Nana says Jimmy Rave had a sip from a water fountain in a New York subway, which for some reason just that phrase is the funniest thing to me. And thus he is too sick to wrestle tonight. Nana tells Rave to go to the back. Nana says Mike Cruel will take out Punk tonight, just like they took out Punk's girlfriends, sprayed him in the eyes, and carved off his tattoo. We then see a clip of Punk being hung by a chain on the previous show, followed by Punk's entrance.
Well, I love the fact that Nana is wearing a tuxedo. And I don't like the fact that Nana says to Jade Chung, "Who do you think you are, Jet Li?" Like, so that's extra racism. Like, it's just
I miss that, honestly.
Yeah, it's just like, it's bizarre. I don't understand it. But I do have something to say about CM Punk's entrance.
Yeah, all I can say about it is Punk comes out with the dog collar all around his neck and a Steve Candido No Gimmicks Needed t-shirt, and I believe he's also written Candido on his wrist tape. We get a big Candido chant eventually from the crowd. So this was the first Ring of Honor show that take place after Candido died, and his death. I mean, Candido made a big impact on a bunch of the indie wrestlers during his last little indie run, and like you can go back and look at Punk's live journal. He was really crestfallen and distraught about Candido's, very untimely, just tragic, gone way too soon passing. And I think a lot of guys that he worked even briefly with at this time were. And so this is the one we got the graphic at the end of the last Ring of Honor show that was a nice little tribute to Candido. But this is the one big kind of acknowledgement on this show proper, I think, is, Punk really repping Candido here. But what did you want to say about Punk's entrance here, Matt?
Well, besides before I get to that, as far as Candido, the reaction to his untimely death feels very similar to the way people reacted to Tracy Smothers, like just in terms of like the respect that these indie guys had for him, like just like they, like he just like this mentor and peer and just like the amazing wrestler. Like it just made me remember that because it was very obviously horribly sad. As far as Punk's entrance, okay, so think of this scenario, and think of how this makes CM Punk come across. At Stalemate, Jimmy Rave lied and said that he couldn't wrestle, he was injured. He left, CM Punk wrestled Mike Cruel, Rave came out and attacked him after. now they built up like now Punk is finally going to get his hands on Jimmy Rave in a dog collar match. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be violent. He can't wait to get Jimmy Rave. Jimmy Rave does the same thing again and says he's sick. And CM Punk just comes out like all excited, like, yeah, I'm gonna have a dog collar match with Mike Cruel now, I guess. just like matter of factly, he gets these did they put the collar on him? Like wouldn't you just be like, okay, no, this is bullshit. Like I'm not doing this. Like this is. It just felt very strange to me. They just had CM Punk come out and just be like, okay, like this is. I guess he's sick. Like it just made CM Punk seem. I don't know, made him seem dumb, or just made him seem like his heart's not in this. Like, yeah, I'll just have a dog collar match with anyone. Like,
for some reason, one of my 5 favorite moments, I think, in doing this podcast ever is you saying, yeah, I'm going to have a dog collar match with Mike. It's such a just the idea and your delivery.
I'm glad that you are so tickled. But do you see my point?
No, yeah, absolutely. And, so just before I get into thoughts, just quickly, the whole idea is, Punk comes out and he just seems very accepting of this. And then before the match can start, Jimmy Rave comes out back from the back. He attacks Punk, revealing he wasn't sick at all. And then eventually they put on the dog collar.
What kind of insane person wouldn't have seen that coming? Like, what? Like, it's just, it's so weird.
So, yeah, I agree. It is weird that, like, Punk is the guy in multiple of these promos before the show where he was like, I'm going to murder you. You're like, literally, I'm going to kill you. You know when you're going to die now. And for him to just, like, shrug off that for the second show in a row, this guy's made up a clear excuse to not wrestle him.
Yeah. Also, I noticed he did the triple threat sign on the way out. And the triple threat sign, I'm just noticing, looks uncomfortably like the new white power symbol. So... That's weird. More racism.
Yeah, I wonder if that's what Drake Younger is doing. He's just a big fan of the triple threat. But Matt, I agree. I think the only thing I can offer to that is researching this. I've always been referring with a lot lately on the Jimmy Rave stuff to both his shoot interview with RF Video and his 2-part interview with the Honorable Mention podcast guys. And something Rave mentioned was it was his idea to do this again, like the opening part where he would fake being sick and then he would, once Punk was in the dog collar and the match was like he would attack and reveal and then you'd get the match. I actually like that as a swerve, but maybe because it was Rave's idea, like Punk just felt like he had to go with it. I don't know, because it is weird that in character Punk wouldn't, 1, know exactly what Rave was doing, and 2, not be furious that he was trying to weasel out of this again.
Yeah, they could do it in a way that didn't make Punk just seem like he was just ready, willing, and able to have a dog collar match against Mike Cruel instead. He'd come out doing a promo being like, this is bullshit, and then they could like try to manipulate him more, and then Rave could do the sneak attack. It just made it seem like too much for just Punk to be like, just okay.
So for the match itself, I would say this match is good, not great. I think its biggest strength is just much like the Nigel Colt match, it is different than everything else on the show. This is a bloody gimmick match. In fact, I would say, I asked you about this, Matt, like when I rewatched this match like a week ago. This, in my opinion, there might be a bloodier match, but off the top of my head, this feels like the second bloodiest match we have seen in Ring of Honor up to this point. I would still be behind Jay Briscoe and Samoa Joe, but Punk bleeds early, and we've talked in the past about Punk is one of the most underrated bladers in his generation. It seems like he doesn't blade often, but when he does, it's almost always just an insane amount. He topped himself here because he blades very early, and he is, at some points in this match, the literal proverbial Crimson Mask, where sometimes people say that and it just means, oh, he had a fair bit of blood. No, there's a couple moments in this match where all you see is like his eyes and his mouth, and the rest is just blood. And at some points it kind of waxes and wanes, the way blood flow works, but like it is a crazy visual at points in this match. And I would say that's the strength of this match, because my problem with this match would be, when you think of a dog collar match, you think of all the possibilities, just like a strap match where maybe someone will hit the other guy with a wadded up part of it, the chain. Maybe he'll choke the guy. Maybe one guy will be on the top rope, but the other guy will tug him off with the chain. And, maybe they'll find all sorts of innovative ways to use the chain or the strap. And this was a match where it's a chain match where they don't use the chain that much. And when they do, it's usually Jimmy Rave. Like, there's a spot early where they're both standing outside and Rave pulls Punk into the ring post using the chain. There's a moment where he chokes Punk, like he gets the chain, I think, in his mouth or something. And there's a couple spots like that, but they don't really explore it's more like another big brawl match that happens to have a chain in it. That might be because this chain seems incredibly long. Rave in interviews has said that the chain was actually very heavy and kind of unwieldy to work with. He points out a spot where he's trying to Pepsi plunge Punk, and Punk backdrops him, and Rave says something like the chain almost hung him, like it got snagged or something. And basically he made it sound like it was really a lot harder to work with the chain than maybe they thought going in. But really, this, as far as a match, there's some brawling, and it's kind of also just maybe a bit closer to a more traditional indie match than you think, but just the blood makes it different. The blood makes it a spectacle. I'm not a person that always thinks blood makes matches better, but this is a match where I felt like every moment of it was compelling because of how bloody CM Punk was, and I can't deny that. I even felt like there were some moments where, it wasn't great from Punk. I thought Punk did a really bad-looking Pepsi twist clothesline. He hits a couple power bombs, which Punk hardly ever does power bombs, and I think when you watch how good they look, you can see why he doesn't do them very often, because they don't look that great. But I still think this match was really memorable and it wasn't one of the best matches on the show, but it was one of the most memorable matches on the show. And I will always remember that crazy amount of blood. And Aaron, what did you think? I mean, just a crazy bloodbath. And it's weird to see that kind of bleeding live. The first indie show I ever went to was this small little Canadian indie. And I don't remember any of the matches on the show. All I remember is that someone bled on my shoe. And I thought that was really cool as a teenager. And so I don't know how you feel about blood in wrestling, but certainly
I love it. Yeah, this is a sick blade job. I mean, I think it's better to think of this, I guess, for me, as more of an extended angle than a wrestling match in some ways, because it was I think we all knew going in the cage match for Chicago was booked, and we all sort of, knew that was going to be the blow off of the feud. But this was fun. It was heated, and I thought that the finishing sequence of those chair shots are just sick. He really just fucking brains them, and you're just and it's interesting. You don't really see. It's funny because you see chair shots in wrestling, and it's always it's a distraction finish in the chair shot, or you rarely just see someone beat someone by just bashing them in the head with a chair 3 times in a row. It was just very brutal and violent, and it looked great, and Punk was bleeding a gusher, and so just an effective hot, sort of 15-minute segment, and leading into the big cage match.
Matt, I mean, crazy amount of blood. I mean, we haven't seen that much blood very often doing the show.
No, I mean there were spots where I was man, his eyes must be full of blood. I've luckily in my life to this point never had a situation where I had a massive bleeding from the top of my head or forehead where I've gotten blood in my eyes. So I don't know what that's like, but I can imagine it's bad to feel. And I mean there was just no way that he's wasn't didn't have blood blocking his vision, and it was just. Gabe at one point said it was a horror movie, and it kind of was. You really don't see too many horror movies where people's faces are covered in real blood the way this person was here in this ballroom at the New Yorker hotel. Boy, what a weird setting to just be walking around with a face covered in blood. I guess it was kind of like The Shining, if it's going to be a horror movie. Hotel. Yeah, never mind.
I should have gone. I didn't put the hotel in shot, even though you had just said the words hotel until you reiterated it. But I should. That deserved more, Matt. That honestly deserved more.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's all I ever wanted. I would say so. This match, as a match, was not as good as the Raven versus Punk dog collar match. But in some ways, I think it was, like, hotter. Like, in terms of, like, intensity and, like, the crowd just going nuts for everything. You know, I do think that the crowd was more with this the whole way than they were for that one. And I think, you know, whatever this match lacked as far as, you know, great wrestling match, like, you know, like, pacing and stuff, I think it was really exciting the whole time. Like, would you agree with that? Like, it was never boring. The crowd was, like, pumped for it. It was intense. There was you know, blood, and there were guts. Not actual guts, but, you know, CM Punk, he showed a lot of guts. But you know, like big moves and you know, some decent kickouts.
No, and almost like Aaron was saying, like, I agree. Like, you know, it's almost like a big angle. You know, I mean, it was a match, but I mean, it goes to, you know, you don't always need something to be a traditional, like, meat and potatoes, good wrestling match to be an entertaining thing on a wrestling show. And absolutely, I think, yeah, like, I agree. Like, whatever this is as a match, it's more as just an event, you know.
Yeah, it was really entertaining and really exciting. Besides the blood grossing me out, as a germaphobe, I also freaked out when Rave put the chain in Punk's mouth. I was just like, man, that chain's been on the floor, it's been on the mat, like, just like, watch what you put in your mouth, man. But the other thing that I noticed about this, like, not that it was about, this isn't about the match itself, but it's just something that struck me about this moment in ROH. The way the crowd was reacting to CM Punk. Because, you know, on some shows in the Northeast, CM Punk doesn't get the desired reaction, like at the Rexplex, right? Like, his matches don't always get over the way that you would think, and he wasn't treated like the pure babyface that he's supposed to. At this show, he was treated like a god, right? Like, he was, like, the crowd just loved him. And I don't know that there was ever a moment in ROH to this day where there were two top baby faces, like almost like a Steve Austin and The Rock, the way that Samoa Joe and CM Punk came across on this show. Like, they both came off like just absolute, like, top level, ultimate baby faces. And, you know, like, that's really cool. Like, that's a cool thing for two indie guys to reach that moment. And obviously Punk would be gone soon and he would turn heel even before that. But can you think of another era in ROH where they had, never mind two, even one babyface that was as beloved as Punk and Joe both were on this show?
And the only thing that it doesn't even get close, but the only thing I could even offer as an example might be the vibe of the very first few shows where you had, like, Danielson and Low Key, like, but even that I don't think comes close to this, but you still had, like, that did have the feeling of these are the two best, like, wrestlers on all the indies, and they're both guys we love. And then you kind of had Christopher Daniels be like the heel counterbalance. But even that, I don't think, you know, like, I don't think people were as invested in the promos and the character, obviously, of Low Key and Bryan Danielson at that point. And
no, I mean, Danielson didn't even have a character.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is different because, like, so, you know, when I was trying to go through and think about, like, who was the top, like, not just the top guy, but the top babyface in ROH in all these different eras, like, there were certain moments where they didn't even really have one, you know? And like even early on in Joe's title reign, he wasn't a pure babyface. You know, and you could say Homicide was, and Homicide definitely was for a few months in 2006, but it was kind of short-lived. You know, maybe at certain points you could say the Briscoes were, but like when Danielson was the champion, he was mostly a heel. When Mcginnis was the champion, he was mostly a heel. You know, when Aries was the champion. Yeah, like, just like, who are the top like at this moment, it's very clear there are two top, and they are just absolute pure baby faces that you want to see succeed, that are the biggest stars that you're going to pay to see. And it really did feel like an Austin and Rock type situation. And it just made me think about how unique that is in ROH, you know, going on, you know, 20 years.
So I completely agree. I just have a couple notes from listening to all these Jimmy Rave shoot interviews, because he's one of the only wrestlers from this era of Ring of Honor that's really done, like, extensive interviews about what they did in Ring of Honor in this era. You know, we got some stuff for 2004, 2003, but this era is a little hard to come by. And couple notes he had in the match. First off, he mentioned something that I had to go back because I didn't notice at first. He always talks about how he loves Prince Nana, but sometimes Prince Nana would like kind of screw things up. And Prince Nana at this point, late in the match, where, you know, to set up the big brutal chair shots to end the match, Nana's supposed to slide a chair in the ring, and Rave points out Nana slides the chair so hard it goes in one part of the ring and falls right out the other, and you can see Punk look at it if you go back and know to look for it, and he just has this laugh like, what the fuck? And then eventually someone gets the chair in, but you can clearly see Punk just being like, oh, like, what the fuck, man? You like, this is the end of the match. And then another thing is, those chair shots are the match does end with, there's 5 chair shots. I would say 3 to the head. Punk kind of tries to duck down a little bit, but they're still pretty hard chair shots to the head. And apparently, according to Rave, that was Punk's idea. Rave was kind of hesitant to do them, but Punk wanted to play up the idea that he's going after an old injury, because for those who don't know, pre-Ring of Honor, CM Punk fractured his skull in a match in 2002 before he even got to Ring of Honor. You can actually see the match he fractures his skull in. It's against Reckless Youth at the Jersey J Cup. I believe it's on YouTube because I rewatched part of it for this show, actually. And Punk does a blockbuster, and his head basically gets sandwiched between the mat and Reckless Youth's head. They kind of collide, and that fractures his skull. Punk wrestles like the rest of the match. You wouldn't even really know that he had a problem. But then if you listen to like a Punk shoot interview he did for our video, like in 2003 or 2004, 2003 probably, he just talks about like he was out of wrestling for 2 months and he was like sensitive to light and horrendous headaches, and just, it sounds like incredibly harrowing. And apparently Punk, basically, he wanted these chair shots to play off of that history, but I felt kind of bad because I was like, how many people know that were watching this knew that history? Because the announcers don't really mention it. Punk alludes to it in his promo, but he doesn't spell it out. Like, it's a pre-Ring of Honor injury that happened at the Jersey J Cup. And I feel like Punk gave so much of himself in this feud, and I feel kind of bad because I feel like as much as he gave, the feud was good, but he, like, you know, bled buckets and took unprotected chair shots. Like, it felt like he was trying to make this as big a feud as the Raven feud, and he was doing like 10 times more than he did the Raven feud, and he still didn't quite get there. Like, he was doing like every bell and whistle you could to make this feud huge.
It is still remembered though as a really good feud. It's not like the feud didn't, like, it's not like it didn't work. You know, it were just Rave. They didn't quite get Rave, I think, to the level that they wanted to, but it definitely made him. You know, I mean, he definitely was more over after than he was before. I think, you know, maybe they just didn't follow up with him enough after it. You know, like they took too long to heat Rave back up after that feud.
But moving on, after the match, the Embassy lays the boots to Punk. Rave lays in more punches until Colt Cabana, James Gibson, Dixie, and Azrael chase them away. Gibson, for some inexplicable reason, came with a weapon from the back, and what that weapon was a, like, drink cooler. It's the most hilarious thing. He throws it from the ring to Nana, who, like, it doesn't hit Nana, and Nana then throws it back in the ring, and for some reason that just made me burst out laughing that James Gibson just comes out with a drink cooler, like, as a weapon. We then cut to a graphic that says 15 minutes later, which is the most unconvincing 15 minutes later graphic I've ever seen. It's hard to believe that they had 15 minutes of this. Punk is still laying in the ring. His friends are trying to help him to his feet. He pushes them off angrily. He eventually gets up to his feet on his own, although he keeps falling over. He's really selling the chair shots, the blood loss, everything. He has to literally crawl on his hands and knees to the back at certain points.
I can imagine that it's not completely selling, you know, like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He stands right at the entrance, and we get a big CM Punk chant as the camera shoots him from behind, and the camera shot, it's all blown out from the light, and it's something I'll describe as, like, unintentionally cool. Like, I bet you they didn't mean to make the shot all blown out like that. It actually does look cool.
It's actually kind of an iconic image, even in ROH.
Yeah.
Like, they use it in video packages and stuff. Like, it's one of the great, actually, camera shots that they'd ever done at that point.
Definitely. The camera follows Punk back through the curtain. He starts laughing. James Gibson screams for a doctor. Punk says he's figured out that Jimmy doesn't want to make it to Chicago. Punk says after spraying him in the eyes with bug spray, taking out his girlfriend, beating him in his hometown, trying to cripple him emotionally and physically, the thing that's really crossing the line is going after his head. Punk says Rave knew the biggest injury he ever sustained was his cracked skull. Punk says concussion or not, missing pints of blood, he'll be locked inside a steel cage with Rave in 1 week where no one can interfere. Punk tells Rave to take a good look at his wife before next week and says he's going to send him home in a box. Alex Shelley's music starts playing in the background for the last third of this promo, and Ring of Honor did this unique thing they usually didn't do where they kept cutting between the promo and Alex Shelley's entrance, and I felt kind of bad because it was like Alex Shelley never gets his moment, kind of, because, this is the biggest match of Alex Shelley's Ring of Honor run, and his whole entrance is intercut with really the focus is all on Punk's promo, as in some ways it should be, but I guess they couldn't squeeze it in.
Although, to be fair, a lot of guys, even in main events in ROH, get their entrances cut out anyway, so I guess, he wouldn't be the first.
And that brings us to the Ring of Honor World Title match.
I do just want to mention about that promo.
Oh, go on.
I feel like they were really trying to go for like a parallel to the Wrestle Rave promo, which was also completely bloodied CM Punk walking to the back, and people like, calm down, Punk, and then he just cuts this really intense promo. And I feel like that's what they were going for here. The kind of like the setup, it was just extremely similar. And I thought it was really good. I thought it was the best Punk promo in a long time.
I thought it was the best Punk promo of this feud. And I guess I was just say, I agree. I guess those are going back to what I was saying before, where it's not that I don't really like the Jimmy Rave CM Punk feud. I just feel like they are so clearly trying to do another Punk Raven level feud. And because it's similar in certain tropes and beats, the dog collar match, the huge blood, the same, Punk hasn't gone this level of intense in his promos since the Raven feud, I think. Even the Daniels Prophecy feud that kind of got, aborted, it is not as intense as this in terms of his promos. And it's just, it's not that the things they're doing aren't good. I think it's more, the Raven feud was about Punk feeling like Raven was this guy who blew chances because he was an alcoholic, and he resents him for the drugs and the alcoholism, and incorporates, the dad. My dad was a drinker, and how much of that is true feelings or not, I could suspend disbelief for that. I think the difference between that feud and this one is it's just as intense, but I can't suspend my disbelief. I don't believe that Punk really feels like Jimmy Rave stole his identity when he took a cheesegrater to his stomach. I don't believe that Punk really wants Jimmy Rave to die. Where the things Punk was saying in the Raven feud, I could suspend disbelief. I felt like, yeah, maybe Punk does feel that way about Raven. I
also think, one of the big things about the Punk Raven feud is that the up and comer did really impressive character work and promos, and Jimmy Rave has he's improved a lot, but he has not done that.
Yeah, it's mostly Nana, and Nana's right. Work is more comical.
Right.
It's supposed to be kind of like the buffoonish heel. Right. But that brings us to what on paper was the main event, the Ring of Honor World Title match. Austin Aries successfully defends the title, defeating Alex Shelley via pinfall in 19 minutes, 32 seconds after he hits the 450 splash. Aaron, you're going to get first go on this because you alluded earlier about how maybe this didn't quite live up to maybe the excitement many people like you had about this match. I'll say there was one person live very into this match. I'll first give a quote to you from Sean Radican at the PW Torch, who was also there live. He wrote, "This was just an excellent title defense for Aries, and on the level of some of Samoa Joe's best Ring of Honor World Title defenses. I found this match to be better than the cage match between Cabana and Aries in February, which was very good." So some people did absolutely love this match. It was the longest match on the show. It was put in the main event spot. What did you think? How did it, go to your, obviously talking about your love of Shelley earlier, big expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I loved this match at the time. Live, I loved the match. I thought it was great. I was with it the whole way. Shelley losing was a bummer. But watching it back, it just felt like it never quite got to that next level. I think it's a very good match. There's nothing sort of wrong with it, but it just never gets to that sort of high level. And it feels maybe like it lacked some nastiness that maybe should have been in there, given what the feud had been. Like it's intense and they're fighting for the world title, but you sort of like, it doesn't feel like there's anything in the match that really speaks to the 1 year history of their relationship. But I feel like it's very good, but it just doesn't get to that next level. And then but I do feel like satisfied in the sense that like this is sort of this conclusion of the original Generation Next story, right? Like they sort of like continue this for a few shows. Like there's a couple Alex Shelley versus Roderick Strong matches, but this is really sort of like the conclusion of like this group comes up, Shelley's the leader, then Aries emerges, they sort of this subtle tension building. Aries wins the title and kicks him out. And then this is sort of like the conclusion of that story. And, in the next few months, we will see sort of a different version of Generation Next and a different version of Alex Shelley. It's also the sort of pinnacle of the Roderick and Evans tag team. And so it feels like it's nice that there's sort of a conclusion of a story, because I think that in like a year-long story, in the sense that like, there's so many frustrated, aborted Ring of Honor stories during this time period, that it just like feels good that like, these guys came up together. They, just sort of, it's nice when there's a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Before I throw it to Matt, one thing I want to ask you, like kind of going back to that, I'll just say at first, I agree with a lot with what your view of the match, but did it feel like to you, like, I felt like the crowd was as into this match as any, like at the start of the match, it does feel like a super important match. Like there are big, like legit dueling chants at the start of the match where like you can tell some different voices at each of the chants. It's not just everyone shouting for both guys. Like to me, this feels like, I don't know, do you agree or not? Like this felt like the crowd was ready for this to be a classic match, and it didn't quite get there. Like I felt like if these guys had done a little bit better, like this, the crowd was up for it.
Oh yeah, I mean, because I think going in, there were a lot of people who were like, "This is the night for Alex Shelley," and sort of in this storyline, like it would have made sense. And I think, it was a hot crowd. Yeah, I think if this had been a great match and Shelley had won, the crowd would have lost its shit.
Yeah, Matt, what do you think? I mean, again, I think the crowd really into this match, but maybe I'll say this, Matt. Sometimes we disagree. A lot of times we agree. I'm willing to bet money you do not agree with Sean Radican that this was on the level of the best Samoa Joe world title defenses.
Yeah, I guess not. No,
It scared me. I was going to take out my wallet.
Take it out. I don't know what I'm saying.
Don't edit that out.
Yeah. It was, I thought it was like a really, 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 really good match. But yes, I agree. It was not the kind of match that would get to that classic status. And I think in one sense, maybe it was missing like the personal nastiness and like hatred that you would maybe think these two guys would have. But on the other hand, I think maybe all it needed was them to slow down a bit. Like they worked a really like fast-paced, exciting, athletic match with like a lot of good moves, good execution. But when you think about the classic world title matches, they're not getting faster down the stretch, right? They're selling more. They're slowing down. Yeah. They're emoting, with their faces and expressing things and really like emphasizing the big moves. And they don't do that here. As far as like the tone, like do they, like should it have been a hate-filled match? I think, on the surface, I would say yes. I think you could also maybe make the argument that their whole rivalry is sort of over. This, like, they're both great athletes, and they're just trying to out-athlete each other. And, I think that might be okay, too. But I think no matter what, if they really wanted to get to that, like, all-timer level that, like you said, the crowd seemed to be ready for, I do think that, maybe just slow it down, like work a little bit of a slower pace. You still do all the cool stuff, but maybe put some more space, time to breathe in between the stuff they did. Not like it was like mile a minute, but it was it wasn't like a world title match pace, when you think of the great world title matches. That said, the athleticism was awesome. The moves were great. It did have, some story stuff. Aries was definitely seeming desperate and, would do the fish hook and kind of a little bit of dirty stuff. But ultimately he won because he was the better man. And I do also think that this, besides just people wanting Shelley to win, I do think Aries is getting to the point in this title reign where people are starting to believe he could lose. And people absolutely believed some of Shelley's near falls, especially when he avoided the 450, hit the super kick, and then immediately hit the shell shock. The crowd just they bought that near fall for sure. Aries ended up winning with the combo that he beat Samoa Joe with, which showed, tried to put Shelley on that level, where Aries needed to really pull out his best stuff to beat Shelley. But that's what I think was missing. It was a little bit of the high drama, but it was well worked. It was a damn good match, and one of Aries' better title defenses. The top three so far would be Cabana, Gibson, and Shelley, and I'm not exactly sure which order I'd put them in. I'd been saying the Cabana match was the best, and I do think it had the most drama, but I don't know. I think this is pretty close. I'd have to watch them back to back, but either one of these could be Aries' best title defense so far.
I agree with both of you guys. I think this is a very good but not quite great match, and I think the problem is it's basically the place on the card that kind of hurts in that sense, because if this match was just a random mid-card match, you'd be super pumped to have a match this good. But unfortunately, because it's the main event on a big, well-remembered Ring of Honor show, it has this really cool feud going into it. The crowd's pumped for it. It just being very good actually turns out to be a little disappointing, which is kind of an unfair expectation sometimes. But, these guys are good enough that there was expectations that big to begin with, and they were in a big spot.
The main event is the main event. You get the spot, you get the expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tougher spot, and Matt, I thought you made a great point. I never really thought of it that way, but how the match could have slowed down in the last quarter, because I feel like that kind of, you put into words something I couldn't quite consciously think of, but the idea of this match doesn't, I wrote in my notes, this match was the last 20 minutes of a 30-minute match where it kind of cut out the slow first 10. And in a way that sounds great, but I couldn't get then why I was feeling like something was missing. And I think your point is perfect, which is because it already kind of starts in second or third gear, it doesn't really change that much in the final bit. It does, yes, there are the big near falls at the end, but it doesn't really get that epic tone, because it doesn't feel that much different than the start, because the start's already pretty fast and action packed. And I felt like Aries worked really hard. I thought Shelley looked good too, but I felt like Shelley, he's the guy, Aaron was talking about how he could have used some more emotion from this match, and I agree. And I felt like it was more on Shelley. To me, watching this match, I felt like this was a standard good Shelley performance. But the way he worked it, it didn't feel like this match was any more important to him than any good mid-card match he'd have, where, I just wanted, it didn't even have to be anger, it just had to be, I just wanted to see something different from him in this match. I wanted him to make me feel like it was his biggest match of his life. And
the gravitas.
Exactly. Instead, I felt like the crowd thought this was a big match, and I felt like Shelley worked this like it was just another Ring of Honor match that he was going to work hard at, but not necessarily harder than, I say, against Jimmy Jacobs at Joe versus Punk 2 or something. But I thought still it was a very good match. And again, it's another one of those matches like the Jay Lethal Joe match, where kind of the story makes you want the underdog face to win. I remember waiting for the results when I was a young guy watching, couldn't watch the show live obviously back then, but waiting for the results. I really wanted Shelley to win and being so disappointed, but that's something that, Ring of Honor would do to make these championship runs strong, is sometimes you'd have a guy that in storyline you would think, this is their time, like the babyface moment, and they just would lose clean as a whistle. They just weren't good enough. And, it can be disappointing in the moment, but that's also what makes strong title reigns, where like guys get sacrificed on the altar, so to speak, where Shelley doesn't get his moment. And in a way, it does hurt Shelley a little bit where, he's wronged. He lays it all out on the line, like how he needs to get revenge, and he doesn't get revenge ever. He loses clean definitively here. But yet that does put over Aries, and I think the one thing that maybe people think about sometimes lately is like, in modern wrestling, so much of the booking is about how to keep everyone strong. Like, if this guy loses, we got to do something to keep him strong. And sometimes in wrestling, for someone to gain something, someone does have to lose something. And I think in a match like this, like Shelley does lose a little momentum, and I think it does make Aries look a little bit better. Like, there's a transfer when you do a match like this, and that's part of wrestling that I think sometimes bookers now try to avoid. But sometimes you need it. But before Bobby Cruz can even finish announcing Aries' win, the lights go out. Homicide's music hits this time. Out he comes with Low Ki and Julius Smokes. They face off with Aries in the ring. Shelley is quickly long gone. He just snuck to the back. Aries
but that's another thing that's not totally great for Shelley, that he loses, but he becomes like an afterthought, which maybe not the best optics for him.
And combine that with the entrance, where he was his entrance kind of takes a backseat to a Punk promo. Shelley does, again, it kind of makes Shelley look like this wasn't the start of something big for him. It was sort of like the end of something big for him. But, so out comes Smokes, Keege, everybody. Shelley's now long gone. Aries eventually leaves, and Joe and Lethal run out from the back. They attack Homicide and Key from behind. They hit them with a double tope. Eventually, they get back in the ring. The bell rings. We get an impromptu, unscheduled main event, a rarity for Ring of Honor. The Rottweilers of Homicide and Low Ki defeat Jay Lethal and Samoa Joe in 9 minutes, 13 seconds when Homicide pins Lethal after he hits the famed, one of my favorite wrestling moves ever, the double stomp cop killer, where he gets Lethal in the cop killer position. Key comes from the top and hits the double stomp, and then, Homicide drives down as he hits the double stomp. And Matt, what did you think of this match? Isn't it crazy that in wrestling today, like you'll never see things like a Ring of Honor show end with Homicide hitting the cop killer on Jay Lethal. So for those who listen like way in the future, we're recording this the day after Ring of Honor's 19th anniversary show, which features Homicide coming back and hitting Jay Lethal with a cop killer. So the more things change, the more things stay the same.
This one had a hotter crowd when it happened, though.
Definitely.
This is another match that was more of an angle than a match, right? And so they do their moves. Like the Homicide does a super fast tope con hilo. There's one, like the first big spot. It's very interesting, because Lethal is holding Low Ki upside down on the top rope, and Joe does a running boot to him. But the way that Lethal gets to the top rope is just very weird. Like Lethal runs at Joe, and Joe hoists him up, and Lethal ends up straddling the top rope, and then actually lying across it. Then he straddles. It's just it's just a very what's happening here, and then it just ends up being that spot, which is a really cool spot. Gabe again calls Monster Mac one of their gang members. I'm never gonna let this go. So it's a bunch of moves. Homicide does a leg drape DDT on Lethal, and Key hangs Lethal in the Tree of Woe, so Homicide can do a basement drop kick. Then Key does the Tree of Woe stomp onto Lethal, which is assisted by Homicide. And that move, no matter how many times he does it, gets a holy shit chant. Right? That's just the coolest move. And there's a somewhat weird spot where Homicide jumps off the middle rope toward Lethal, stops short, and hits an ace crusher. I thought they saved it pretty well, but I Homicide saw Lethal's reversal coming, but I don't think that's what they were going for. So Lethal escapes a pile driver by crawling through Homicide's legs, and Homicide avoids the dragon suplex twice and goes to tag in Low Ki, but Lethal pulls him back, hits the dragon, and tags in Joe, and Joe just goes insane. ST Joe on Low Ki, overhead belly to belly on Homicide. Homicide saves Low Ki from the Muscle Buster. and drop kicks him, and then like Joe is leaning over the middle rope facing the outside of the ring, and that gets Key to allows Key to hit a double stomp with Joe in that position, which is such a cool double stomp. Lethal is, Low-Ki is the master of the double stomp. Like, just when he does it, it's just like, it's always amazing. And I feel like this match, you feel like he's sort of perfected it, like the timing and the execution. Like, it's just like the art of the double stomp in this match. Then Low-Ki hit drop kicks Lethal in the corner. No, excuse me, hits drop kicks Joe into the corner and goes up top for the double stomp, but Lethal catches him. Low-Ki knocks him off into the clutches of Homicide, and that's when they do the double team double stop cop killer. Now, I do want to say one thing about this move. Like, it's sold as the most devastating move like ever, and like it should be. Like, it's really, really cool. Like, it's like, but they do it in a much safer way than it seems. Because the way that obviously this move would be extra dangerous is if Low-Ki hit the double stomp as Homicide was driving Lethal down into the mat. But that's not what they do. Low-Ki jumps off, stomps Lethal's butt, and then Homicide does the cop killer. And it's like separate movements. And so really the double stomp doesn't do much to change what goes on in the cop killer. So I think they actually do it pretty safely, but it still looks awesome anyway. And yeah, I thought this match was like all about intensity and like how impromptu it was and unpredictability. Like, it wasn't about building to this like, great crescendo. It was just like short, to the point, memorable spots, like, but it also just tied the whole show together, and it made it seem special, and it like made a statement like, okay, Low-Ki is back. They've injured Jay Lethal. They've made a statement. This show like really mattered. And there's sort of like new shit going down. And I think that it was, one of the best final segments ever. One of the best show long angles they ever did also.
I agree that like, this was, I would say, much like the Punk Rave match. It was kind of like, I wouldn't say it was totally an angle, but it wasn't totally a match. It was like halfway between an angle and a match. I would almost call this is like dessert at the end of the show, because most of the match, this match is good. I wouldn't say it's great, but there's great moments within it. Most of the matches, Lethal just getting beaten down by the two most intimidating badasses in Ring of Honor at this point, probably, in terms of just being menacing, Low-Ki and Homicide. And I think the part of this match, though, I love is the couple interactions with Low-Ki and Samoa Joe. And every time I see one of them, I always love it, and I always get pissed off that we never, like, they kept teasing something that we were never going to get. And what I love about these interactions is, Joe is such a badass and such a strong character and so protected in some ways, and he carries himself so strong that, like, there are very few wrestlers at this point in this promotion that Joe will or even could like sell big for, and you would buy it. Like earlier when I was having a hard time buying, him going down from one Lethal slap. Like whenever he wrestles Low-Ki, he sells so big, and Low-Ki's one of the only guys who carries himself in such a way where like you buy that, like, not just could Low-Ki beat Joe, he could kick his fucking ass. Like there's a moment here where Joe takes like a shotgun drop kick from Low-Ki, and he just sells it huge. Or the same with like that double stop where he's in the ropes. Joe sells so much bigger for Key than most guys, and you buy it. You're like, yeah, you better, like, Joe better be fucking scared of Low-Ki, because Low-Ki could potentially like beat the living shit out of this guy. And there are very few wrestlers, I think, at this point that have the credibility in their character and the way they work and the way they carry themselves where they could do that, and where Joe could sell that big. And it just makes it, every interaction they have is so fucking just cool and exciting because of that. But Aaron, this was the end of the show, at least in the building, and yeah, like we rarely got this in Ring of Honor. This is a very ECW kind of the impromptu thing. We rarely got this in Ring of Honor, and if it was done to death, it'd probably be annoying. But I thought this was really cool in Ring of Honor because we rarely got this kind of impromptu, kind of crazy end to the show.
Yeah, this was great. It just felt like, it's it's cool when wrestling surprises you, and you just it feels like you're at like a lot, that's what makes wrestling so special, right? It's like this sort of live, and it's interactive, and it's and you have, it's just like in the moment, and it was great. The double stop, the pop for the double stop cop killer is like, incredible. Just like I feel like it's just like an iconic moment in this company's history, and just like a great ending to an awesome show where I yelled and screamed and sweated and just one of the New Yorker hotel Ring of Honor crowds are just like really some of the best, up there with, Reseda, I think, in terms of like the best pro wrestling crowds I've been in. And it was just like, oh yeah, this is great. I think you nailed it when you described it as the dessert. Couldn't be better.
And the only other thing I mentioned, I guess I should note is Joe's arm is all bandaged up, and Gabe says that's from Joe when he fell through the table against Jay Lethal. So I don't know if he legit really cut up his arm or something, because it is all bandaged up in a way it isn't for the Lethal match. So if he cut himself in that, I did not notice during that match, but it sounds very plausible. So I thought that was interesting. But after the match, the Rottweilers celebrate on the outside. Dave Prazak on commentary says something like, Jay Lethal's lucky his neck isn't broken, and Gabe does the classic Gabe Oversell where it's like, surely it is broken.
Kind of an Owen Hart voice, even.
Yeah, like you can see right there like the difference in commentary styles, where like one guy's trying to sell it in a realistic way, and one guy's just going as big as he can get, even if it's not realistic. Because one guy's trying to say, well, he could have had his neck broken. The other guy is like, no, Jay Lethal's neck is broken, which is why, of course, we'll definitely see him on the next show. But although
I will say Lethal is out for a little while, like a month or so.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah, I guess a broken neck could heal in a month. I'll test that out tonight. No. So at this point, as Key's walking to the back, he's facing the ring. One fan puts bunny ears behind Low Key's head, and he doesn't notice. And right after that, like Gabe's like, pray for Jay Lethal, and that's just a funny. I think the bunny ears is going to be the picture for the show. It's a great little thing. Whoever did that, you're a dick, but also funny.
Aaron, was it you? Was it you, Aaron?
Do you have long red hair, Aaron?
I do not. It was not me. I was in the general admissions. Or no, I was in the second row, but not behind the entrance, unfortunately.
Hunt for Aaron, anyone watching the show, second row. Every time there's someone I know, I'm glad I didn't know you were in the crowd for the show, because anytime there's someone that like we've had on the show or that I recognize that I know is at one of these shows, I spend the whole show distracted looking for them in the crowd.
Well, Escape from New York is the only ROH show I can think of where I am on camera almost the entire time. It's awkward.
God damn it. Anyway, we go backstage. We find Jimmy Rave and Prince Nana. Rave has a bunch of Punk's blood on him. Nana says they beat Punk fair and square tonight. Next week he wants Rave to put Punk in his grave. Nana says that just like the military in Ghana dies for him, Rave has to die next week to be the biggest part of the embassy, which felt like Nana going heavy in a way that maybe doesn't fit his character. Like he's now saying like you gotta die. Rave says Punk doesn't scare him. He's beaten AJ Styles, and next week Punk is just another stepping stone. So this felt like they were trying to do a serious promo that was rare even from the embassy to try and really up the stakes here. But again, it just something about Prince Nana, of all people, being like, you've got to kill CM Punk, you've got to die. It doesn't quite fit for me. But next we see a clip of a prior Bryan Danielson homicide match. Gabe tells us that their best of 5 series will end at the next show in a steel cage match. The winner will get a future world title shot. Then we get a James Gibson backstage promo. Gibson says he thinks he redeemed himself tonight for his Best of American Super Juniors tournament performance, but he's looking to the next show and his world title rematch with Austin Aries. James says he underestimated Aries last time, and he will not make the same mistake in the rematch. Finally,
he also calls Black Tiger Mask.
I thought that was cute, Black Tiger Mask. I would love if he called Jushin Liger Mask. That would be good. But elsewhere, we see Sugar Sean Price. It feels like we haven't seen him in a while. He's with Colt Cabana. Colt is unhappy that he was kicked right in the bollocks in his match tonight. Colt says he was there for Nigel in Boston, and Nigel wasn't there for him tonight, or in them on that show, and now he does this. Colt then mocks Nigel's accent with an impression of him until Nigel walks in and says, "If you have something to say it to my face, shithead." Colt clams up a lot, kind of like a cowardly heel at this point, and just says, "Oh, you kicked me in the balls." Nigel says accidents happen, and he asks Colt if he wants another accident to happen. And on that kind of strangely ominous note, we end the show. So before I get opinions from you guys, I'll get some opinions from some other people, because as you guys mentioned earlier, I forget which one of you, but like this was the show Gabe really hyped up a lot to a lot of people. I think he really wanted a lot of reviews on this. And first off, he gave a big little comment to the Pro Wrestling Torch at the time, going to the Torch, regarding the May 7th Ring of Honor debut in Manhattan. Ring of Honor promoter and booker Gabe Sapolsky is extremely pleased. Quote, "The Manhattan debut will go down as one of the favorite nights in my entire life," he tells the Torch. "Everything was just on fire all night, from the crew to the fans. It was an absolutely tremendous crowd and reminded me of the ECW shows at the old Elks Lodge in Queens. The atmosphere was so intense, and the guys in the ring fed off of that and performed like it was our first pay-per-view. It was just a great, great night where everything clicked," he said. He says the reactions that Samoa Joe and CM Punk received impressed him. Quote, "It says that they follow the product and know the storylines and the history behind everything, and that is the best kind of crowd to have a show in front of. It showed how much they appreciate everything that Punk and Joe have done. The crowd was passionate before, during, and after the event." Gabe says, "The atmosphere was tremendous from the moment I arrived. There were fans there 3 hours. There were fans there hours early. It's always fun to go around New York City and just take in the spirit of that city. Then when you walk into a building and see Madison Square Garden a couple blocks away, you know that you are somewhere special." So Gabe obviously calling not just one of the best nights of his career, one of the best nights of his life. So that leads us to what I'm going to end on before the opinions on the show, which was, if longtime listeners will know, in 2004, the Pro Wrestling Torch went Ring of Honor review fucking crazy, where they were reviewing like a ton of Ring of Honor shows, to the point where all of a sudden in one issue, Wade out of nowhere posts an entire page of letters just of people saying, "Quit covering Ring of Honor so much, we don't care." At that point, the Ring of Honor coverage, the at least not the news, but the reviews, almost completely dried up overnight. So it should show you how big the show was and how much Gabe was pushing on people to review, that we actually got the return of the round table reviews for this show. And none of these guys were as high on it, at least the ones I'm going to call out. And I just thought there were some interesting quotes. So this is not their full reviews. This is not everyone that reviewed it, but I thought this was kind of notable stuff. Wade Keller gave the show a 7.5 out of 10. He wrote, "This didn't have any one match that went longer than 20 minutes or felt like a match of the year candidate. That alone is not the only way for a Ring of Honor tape to get an 8.0 score or above, but it sure helps. While there wasn't one must-see match, and while I wouldn't classify the show as must-see, I highly recommend the event. It's an enjoyable, digestible 3 hours of good to very good wrestling action that differentiates itself from WWE and TNA due to A, crowd enthusiasm, B, innovative moves, C, feud intensity, D, big spots, and E, steady yet not annoyingly breathless or frenetic pacing. The lack of clarity of the in-ring mic work remains an issue. The commentary was fine, but not spectacular. As an overall package, it compares well to TNA's more disjointed and sometimes dated-feeling pay-per-views, but other than Aries vs. Shelley, nothing stood out as remarkably better than the great performances by TNA's top X Division matches. It would be difficult for a wrestling fan of any style not to enjoy this show. I've seen better overall shows from Ring of Honor, but it is very good overall. The New York crowd's enthusiasm made up for the somewhat shoddy-looking setting." That brings us to Bruce Mitchell, who also gave it a 7.5, and I got an excerpt from him. He said, "This was a solid Ring of Honor show with plenty of very good wrestling. I didn't like the two neck spots that were a central part of the show, though. The risk for Jay Lethal and Jack Evans simply wasn't worth any possible reward. It's a problem for this promotion. What kind of spot or angle will wake up a crowd more educated to judging the star rating than to getting emotionally involved in the stories? The Ring of Honor World title match with Austin Aries defending against Alex Shelley was very good, the height of the European style on the independent scene. The work carried the match, and Shelley's quest to be a babyface champion wasn't compelling. Aries has been a good choice to follow Samoa Joe as Ring of Honor champion. He's a strong enough worker in a different way that fits well into the role. The match between Colt Cabana and Nigel Mcginnis was pretty decent. Cabana is one of the most well-rounded characters in the promotion, but unfortunately that character belongs to Disco Inferno. The did he or did he not personally low blow issue at the end was well booked. This is a good show for anyone interested in starting up with Ring of Honor. It's not a good sign, though, that when the boutique opened in the biggest city in the world, only 400 fans showed up. So, guys, before I go to the last quotes, let me just say, I think Bruce gets like 18 things wrong in this little excerpt. First off, Austin Aries versus Alex Shelley is the height of the European style. I don't think there's anything about that match that's European, especially when Nigel Mcginnis and Colt Cabana is clearly the match on the show that's European influenced. Second of all, I think, as Matt, you just pointed out, in actuality, that Jay Lethal Cop Killer double stomp is pretty safe, I would say.
I mean, not so much less safe than a regular cop killer, at least. You know?
Yeah. And then finally, I would say, third, actually, there's 2 points I want to make. Third, this is something Bruce has done multiple times, but he keeps saying that Colt Cabana is basically a Disco Inferno ripoff. Other than the fact that they both had some comedy, I don't know what they possibly have in common. Colt Cabana wrestles a completely different style. Even the way he works comedy into matches is different. His gimmick is different. I would say he's a much more talented, well-rounded person. I don't know, unless you think that every wrestler that has ever done a comedy spot ever is a Disco Inferno ripoff, I don't know how his character, quote, belongs to Disco Inferno. And then finally, I mean, the Observer claims, and who knows if the Observer is right, but they claimed it was a overflow 750 crowd, and meanwhile, Bruce says it's a 400 fans showed up, which I don't get any of that. I just don't understand. And then finally, we get Jason Powell, who, if people who weren't really reading the Torch at the time, big ECW guy, was always kind of strangely a little bit hard on Ring of Honor. He never quite got it. And he gave this show a 7.0. He writes, I hate to be the curmudgeon of the group, but I just didn't see much of a difference between this show and other Ring of Honor events. Let's start with the basics. Yes, the in-ring product is very good. However, the work rate really isn't any better than you see in most top WWE and even TNA matches. Not so much a shot against Ring of Honor as much as it is a testament to how good the work rate is across the board these days. The Ring of Honor wrestlers try hard, but they just aren't as polished as some of their counterparts from TNA. The biggest flaw I see is that most of the wrestlers know how to pop a crowd with flashy moves, yet rarely show any understanding of how to keep the crowd hot by following up with the right set of moves. Few, if any, Ring of Honor wrestlers come across like major stars. Having attended a Ring of Honor event last year, I can say that wrestlers such as Samoa Joe, Bryan Danielson, and CM Punk come off like stars in person. However, they just didn't come across that way on this video release, and the fact that live crowds were split in their support for most of the major matches didn't help in this case. It's great that the crowds react so passionately for the wrestlers and have the freedom to choose their personal favorites, but it almost sends the message to newer viewers that there's no next big thing on the Ring of Honor talent roster because the fans don't seem to unanimously rally behind anyone. Another problem is that there are just too many factions. Do we really need to have a small posse of stablemates and managers at ringside for most matches? Are some of these managers and valets really worth the appearance fees that they collect? At the very least, the announcers need to do a better job of keeping viewers up to date on who's aligned with whom. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Ring of Honor needs to hire a crew of legitimate announcers because Gabe Sapolsky just isn't cutting it. There are too many dead air spots in the commentary. I'm all for letting the angle and the crowd do the talking, but either this is happening too frequently in Ring of Honor or the announcers need to do a better job of keeping the conversation flowing. Guys, and finally he also adds, the production values are awful. I'm so tired of not understanding half the words the wrestlers and managers say during their in-ring promos. It would be nice if company officials would get after some of the wrestlers about upgrading their Bush League ring gear. I just didn't buy Alex Shelley as a challenger for the Ring of Honor title. His ring work is solid, but he lacks charisma and never really care about whether he won or lost his match. Guys, kind of surprising considering how well the show remembered that these guys, while giving decent ratings, were kind of surprisingly harsh, and I have to imagine Gabe probably pushed these guys to review the show, and it's probably like a case of be careful what you wish for, because they ended up giving the show, I think, some of the least enthusiastic, most critical reviews that anyone of this era gave the show. Do you guys have any thoughts on that before we get into our thoughts? Or because I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of compare our thoughts to their thoughts.
Yeah, these guys are fucking lost. It's okay. It's cool. Some people don't understand wrestling. You know, that's why they're the Torch and not the Observer. Just totally out to lunch. Horrendous takes. This is a classic show. I just like, I mean, even beyond everything else, it's like, I don't know how you can watch a show with that crowd and not be like, oh, this is basically the same as all the other Ring of Honor. I don't see any difference between this and like Back to Basics.
And making a critique about how they don't know how to keep the crowd going after a move, right? Like,
just insane, completely lost. Maybe they were just mad at Gabe for pushing them to review it. I don't know. But what did Dave say about the show?
Well, and I'm just, before we get there, I just want to say about the Torch. I used to listen to the Bruce Mitchell, like, Wade Keller audio show. This is like probably the first wrestling podcast I really listened to back in 2005, maybe even as far back as 2004. I'm not even positive. And I found, their talk about like the issues of the day interesting. But when it comes to like reviewing and like analyzing an event and matches and wrestling styles and stuff, I've never understood what planet they were on. Like, it just feels like their analysis of like the actual matches just seems so alien to me. Like, at every point in history, I just like, we just see wrestling like just so differently. It's very interesting, and this is no exception.
The one thing that really stood out to me, I think, and it's something that they've done occasionally, which saying that these wrestlers aren't as polished. And look, some of them aren't. Obviously,
Meltzer would say the same shit. Like,
yeah, exactly. That, and certain of the wrestlers certainly, they don't have the greatest gear. They don't, and certainly some of the spotty or undercard guys definitely have matches where their execution isn't clean. But I don't know how anyone could look at this era of Low Key or Samoa Joe or fucking James Gibson and say that they're not some of the most polished wrestlers mechanically in terms of how they work, everything, their presence, as anybody in the major leagues. Like, I really do think that's literally just saying indie guys, seeing them wrestle in a small kind of, small looking building and instantly just putting unpolished indie guy. Like, like comparing this isn't quite on the level of some TNA stuff. Who the fucking highlights of a lot of TNA for the next few years are going to be? The guys you're saying aren't as good as the guys in TNA right now. Samoa Joe is going to be the fucking best thing they've ever had very soon. AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Ring of Honor regulars. These guys, they're good, but they don't have that polish that a TNA guy would have. Like, yeah, they don't have the polish of a fucking, I don't know. Name somebody. I don't know. Like, I have no.
America's Most Wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Samoa Joe, he's just not quite as smooth as that Chris Harris. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? But, I mean, still, they didn't give it horrible ratings. But for the Meltzer thing, I didn't find any review. He just went off the live reports, which was an incredible show.
Oh, I wish I had known. He does do a review.
Oh, that must be some Observer way later that I haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, it's in July. Oh, if you give me a second and I'll edit out a few minutes, I can find it. If you're okay with that.
Sure.
All right.
That wasn't so bad. So this is from the July 4th, 2005 issue of The Observer. He says, if you haven't seen the product before, a good start point is the 5/7 show in New York. It's a show.
Dave gets it.
Yeah, it's a show where every match on the card is strong, and every match is different. The Izzy and Deranged versus Azrael and Dixie opener won't fit everyone's tastes because it's the classic indie match of guys who don't look at all like wrestlers doing crazy spots one after the other. But once you get past the not looking like wrestlers, you kind of recognize guys that can't get over doing any other style until they are established stars to begin with, so the best you can do is do that style well. They didn't miss spots, and their stuff looked great, and the crowd was going nuts by the finish. And that was the weakest match on the show. Nigel Mcginnis versus Colt Cabana was a storytelling European-style match where Cabana get winning. He said, "Where Cabana get winning." The match.
You have to read Meltzer for once. Not so easy, huh?
And Mcginnis got frustrated. Mcginnis was with a low blow, but it was delivered with plausible deniability that it could be an accident. So you get a clean pinfall and a story that kept the program going. James Gibson versus Black Tiger was a good Japanese-style match. B.J. Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs versus Jack Evans and Roderick Strong was a fast-paced, high-impact, and big moves tag title match. Samoa Joe versus Jay Lethal, with Joe winning the pure title, was good in the sense the crowd bought it. Joe has the ability to sell and look vulnerable against much smaller guys and still get over as a tough guy, which is a real talent. Lethal is a good athlete, but his strikes are very weak. That's what I was referring to before. In ROH, he can get away with it because of his athleticism, but he'd be exposed in WWE. Aries versus Alex Shelley in a title match was an excellent championship match. If Aries was 6 feet tall, people would be talking about him like he was the next Shawn Michaels. He's got awesome talent, and he does a great job in the champion role, and I was very skeptical of the decision to make him champion. The problem is, he has to earn it to new fans, because he doesn't look like a world champion, so he always has a hurdle to overcome. Main event of Joe and Lethal tagging against Homicide and Low Ki was more of a street fight style great match, including a sick finish on Lethal with a combination cop killer and double foot stomp off the top, with Lethal taking it in a manner where it was sold as a believable injury spot. Seems like he didn't mention the rave punk stuff, which is surprising, but he does do the annoying thing that he always seems to do, where he keeps talking about how the guys don't look like wrestlers, which is a pet peeve of mine. But he definitely seemed to get the show a lot more than the Torch guys did.
And I will give him credit. You know, he does almost call himself out, where people who've listened to the show, our podcast regularly, will know, like, when Aries became champion, Dave was fairly skeptical that Aries was going to be able to follow up, you know, Joe. And obviously I wouldn't say Aries is Joe level, but, you know, Dave's outright saying, like, hey, I was skeptical and he's winning me over. So I think a lot of people wouldn't humble themselves like that to actually go back and be like, look, yeah, I was kind of wrong about this guy. So credit to him. So with all the other reviews, of course, the only thing that matters at the end of the show, guys, is what we thought of it. Aaron, you're the guest. I mean, you already gave some of your thoughts, but if you have any more final thoughts, now's the time to just what'd you think of the show and what'd you think of revisiting it? I guess because we're so slow, you mentioned you rewatched it a second time for the show. So you revisited it twice recently.
You know, earlier in the day, I was kind of dreading watching it because I was like, oh, it's like finally nice outside, and I'm going to be like spending it inside watching a wrestling show that I saw like a month or two ago. But it's just a great fucking show. It's a blast. It makes me nostalgic, because it's my first ever wrestling show. It was incredible live. Not many of the shows I've gone to, I've been very fortunate. I've gotten to go to a lot of cool wrestling shows, so some of them have like gotten up to that level. But yeah, it's an excellent show, and probably for me, one of the most memorable, like, top to bottom Ring of Honor shows, in terms of like, I've seen probably like most of the shows through like the middle of 2006, and I would say this is up there with like I guess like the 100th show in terms of sort of just like really memorable, great Ring of Honor shows from top to bottom. I mean, it's definitely like, yeah, main event spectacles, Death Before Dishonor. I don't know. It's one of the great shows. I don't know. What do you guys think?
So, the funny thing, like reading like the Wade Keller thing, like I agree with some of what he said, but my feelings on the show are way more positive. Like I agree. I don't think there's a match of the year can on the show. In fact, if I was going to use like the old star ratings, I don't think there's a 4-star match on the show. I would have a bunch of matches at 3 3/4 star, like right at the edge. But here's the thing. To me, this show, if you were going to use like a weird baseball analogy, I think this is a show where there's no home run, but the show is nothing but doubles and triples. Like everyone succeeds, everyone gets a hit, and not just like a little hit. Like it's good to really good. And if nothing is going to be on that, I think on our end of year things, less probably no individual match, but the show will probably be on our end of year things because there's a consistency of quality to the show and there's a vibe to it. Like, I forget one of the quotes, one of the ones I read was that it almost had like a pay-per-view type vibe. I think Gabe said that, and I agree. This felt in a weird way almost like a Ring of Honor pay-per-view before they had them, like a major event. The crowd was great. Being in New York for the first time in a long time and in Manhattan for the first time ever does actually make the show feel different, and it just feels like a company after kind of a weird first quarter that is instantly now back to being hot again. And I guess my last thing before I throw it to you, Matt, is the best way I can sound why this show is how I feel about the show is you and I, we usually we're not tough like Aaron Taube. We watch our shows in piecemeal because we're taking notes after every match. So instead of foregoing a really beautiful sunny day for a couple of losers on a Saturday night, or just one loser, me, I don't want to call it down. You're great, Matt. But me,
I'm the king of the losers.
For a king and his jester, we normally watch, I would say we usually talk, I watched, half an hour today or whatever and did the notes and whatever. This was one of the only shows where I still did that, but I could have watched the show in one sitting and wrote the notes in one sitting, even though that would have been like probably 5 to 6 hours of my time in one go. Like I was always going like, oh, I can't wait to watch this next. I can't wait to watch this. It's just probably the most compulsively watchable Ring of Honor show we've ever watched, where it's almost like the Lay's potato chips of Ring of Honor shows, where it's like you just always want to see the next segment, the next match. It just sounds as appealing as the last one. And not every show needs a match of the year contender. Like Wade was right when he said that. I think differently about the show than him. I think a show can be a great show without having one fantastic great match, and I think Manhattan Mayhem is like the epitome of that. Matt, what do you think?
So you just gave an excellent review to this show. And just to show you what I feel about this show, I feel like you dramatically underrated it. I think this is easily the best show we've watched in the entire time that we've done this show. I have a hard time.
Let's go.
I have a hard time thinking that there's a better ROH show ever, honestly. And I didn't even go to this one. I went to a lot of fantastic ROH shows. I still think this is the best show they ever did. I think that you're right, there wasn't a match of the year, but I do think there were 4-star matches. I think the tag title match was a 4-star match. I think you could probably argue that the pure title match was, maybe even the world title match. I think that there were fantastic angles. A crowd, there were just, in ROH history, I don't know that there was ever a better crowd up and down than the crowd on this show. Like, you have crowds for certain matches, like Joe and Kobashi and Cage of Death and the 100 show main event. But from the beginning to end, the crowd was amazing. Every single match was at least pretty good, most very good or better. It had these angles that really connected everything. It had an angle that wouldn't even seem like a big deal, where the Carnage Crew came back and it felt like a huge deal. Had the return of Low Ki, had Joe and Punk just at the absolute peak of them, just seeming like the lords and masters of ROH. The show that I would most actually compare it to is ECW Barely Legal, their first pay-per-view, and you sort of, kind of said this is like ROH's first pay-per-view, just in terms of the crowd heat, the pacing, just this feeling like something that should explode, and be this huge deal, because everything was clicking. And I really do feel like, even though I nitpicked some stuff, there's some stuff that felt ridiculous to me, but as in totality, everything was clicking. This is a moment in time that I don't think they could ever recapture. And I know, because I went to the Futures Now, and we'll talk about that, fairly soon, hopefully. But that was a really good show. And I watched this, and this was on another level. And I was almost chasing the dragon. I would go back to these ROH shows and chase the vibe that I felt watching this show at home. And, one of the other shows at the New Yorker Hotel, they felt pretty special. And I went to Escape from New York, and that felt that had an amazing crowd too. And, Joe and Kobashi. But, I realized pretty shortly, this show was not the norm. This had a very uniquely special atmosphere that I don't know if there were any other shows that really had this atmosphere. And there were definitely shows with more top level matches. There were definitely shows with bigger angles, bigger blow-offs, maybe even more important developments, but I don't think there was a show that just felt this perfectly packaged as this one did.
I would.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, I would say, if I'm rating this on the torch scale, 10 out of 10.
I would just ask you, Matt, I think it's rare among Ring of Honor. It might be rare among wrestling. How many times does a 3-hour wrestling show not have one match or one major angle that I would even classify as average. Like, sometimes you go, there's two great matches and a lot of good matches and an average match or whatever. I don't think there's anything I would even rate as low as average. Like, everything on the show is better than average, and almost everything is like like far above average.
Yeah, and
like, there's not a moment in this match that dips. I mean, in the show that dips, really, for me.
Yeah, and not just that, like, it was good. It's like it clicked, everything achieved exactly what they wanted it to achieve, and that's and then some. And, that's, I think, what makes it so great. This is, maybe even in terms of because I know, like, Gabe is a guy that really put a lot of thought into, like, how he paced shows and booked them. And in terms of, like, that, as, like, a one-night booking achievement, this might be his crowning achievement.
Yeah, and even it was him it was Gabe, in a way, Gabe was obviously influenced by his ECW upbringing and all that, but, like, in some ways, like, he tried to steer away from certain tropes. In some ways, this is like Gabe doing an ECW style show, and it, and in a really great way.
Yeah, in some ways doing it better, because, like, the wrestling was better up and down the show, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just really cool to see him kind of bring out that style and be like, yeah, we're going to have, like, the crazy impromptu opening, the crazy impromptu end, and it's just, like, there's a fair bit of variety on the show with the Bloodbath and the European style match, and, you got the crazy Spot Fest tags. Like, yeah, it's a cool show that also is kind of has a unique vibe to it, too. Like, yeah, I don't think other great Ring of Honor shows would ever quite feel like this one. But that's that for this show. And so, as always, Aaron, do you have anything you want to plug? I know you were talking before the show, before we started recording, that you've made the smart decision to sometimes retroactively shut down Twitter for a while. Smarter man than many of us, including me. Do you have any projects now that you want to plug? Anything you're going on? Do you want people to know about your social media?
Yes, I have my Twitter at AP Taube. I'm locked right now, but big project right now we're working on, trying to get my friend Jocelyn Carr elected to the city council here in New York City. She's running for the council in Eastern Queens. She is the daughter of a taxi driver and a grocery store worker, so a working class woman, trying to just build a better city that works for everyone, looking to expand public transit, huge transit desert in Eastern Queens, looking to fully fund our public schools and bring relief to small business owners and taxi drivers during this coronavirus crisis. You can check her out at JocelynCaur.nyc, JASLINKAUR.nyc. If you want to build a better New York City, sign up for a phone bank, come knock some doors sometime, and hopefully I'll see folks out there.
That's my favorite plug in the history of this show.
Yeah, much like Stephen Graham, whenever someone takes the rare opportunity on the show when we give them the plugs to actually plug something that would, like, better the world, I always feel like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? I do a Ring of Honor podcast. Like, oh God. So, yes, definitely, if you vote in the New York area, or even if you don't, just support local politics, look up your candidates. I mean, I'm sure Aaron's got a good one here, probably. I mean, I haven't looked into it, so maybe I trust Aaron. We
don't miss. Early listeners of the Everything Elite podcast will remember, getting the AOC plugs before she became famous, Tiffany Caban plugs before she blew up. So I'm kind of like, the Gabe Sapolsky. Yes, yeah. Gabe Sapolsky of left-wing electoral politics. I'll let you know who the big stars are before they blow up. So, get in now.
If she becomes one, or when she becomes one, I will clip out that and be like, that was on my podcast.
There you go. Yeah.
So for our plugs, nothing noble at all. If you want to contact us, it's throughtheyears@gmail.com. That's THROH. I'm at Trevor Dame on Twitter. Matt is at MayorMGF. We have a thread on the Pro Wrestling Only Plugs forum. And of course, if you're listening to this, you know where to find the podcast. So thank you so much, everybody. Next time on the show, we will be covering the final showdown, which is going to be the blow-off of the Best of 5 series between Bryan Danielson and Homicide inside a steel cage, plus the Austin Aries James Gibson world title rematch. Another big show right there. That'll be fun. And so until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.